Eleanor was awake before the house was, the way she always was. She knelt on the cold boards of the great hall, wrung out a rag, and started on the floor while the rest of the manor still slept. Her hands were already raw. They had been raw for years. The hall was too big for one person. The whole house was. It had been built for a barony with money, and the money was gone now, but the rooms had stayed the same size. She had until evening to clean every one of them alone, or her brother would not get his medicine. So she did not slow down. She reached for the other thing instead, the thing her mother had left her. Where her hand passed with the cloth, a thread of wind gathered the dust ahead of the stroke, and a thread of water lifted the grime out of the grain, and for one breath the boards lit from underneath. A soft line of light followed her hand down the floor, pale and clean, the color of the first light before sunrise. It did not flicker like fire. It glowed steady and low, sinking down into the old wood the way warmth sinks into cold hands. And where it passed, the grain came up clear and bright, and the dust simply lifted away on the air and was gone. For that one held breath, the dark hall was lit by the floor itself, by a girl on her knees, by something far too clean and far too quiet to belong to a place like this. Then she lifted her hand, and it was gone. And the floor was only a floor, and she was only a maid again. She told herself it was dawn catching the water. She knew it was not. Years of doing it in secret had taught her to fold the magic into the motion of her wrist, to keep the light low and the breath of wind small, so that anyone watching would see a tired girl with a rag and nothing else. No one was watching. That was the point. The safest thing to be in this house was a sound nobody noticed, and the house took it without ever knowing. Room after room, year after year, her hands had passed over every floor and every sill, and the place had never once gone stale, never soured, never grown the damp gray rot that should have crept into an old manor with no money to keep it. The family inside slept easy in clean air and clean rooms and never asked why. They thought it was simply how a house behaved. It was not. It was her. Greta was already inside, waiting. The maid turned the moment the door opened, sneering that Eleanor was as slow as ever, that she was eating into the only break a working woman got. Eleanor said nothing and knelt to begin. That was the wrong answer too. It was always the wrong answer. The kick came from behind, hard, in the small of her back. Eleanor pitched forward before she could catch herself, and her forehead struck the carved base of the pillar by the bed. There was a dull crack of bone on stone. Then the warmth, sliding down past her eyebrow. Greta muttered that clumsy people were always getting themselves hurt, and hurried out of the room as if the blood were a thing she could be blamed for. No one would ask her about it. No one ever did. Margaret had made it plain, long ago, and without ever saying the words, that whatever was done to Eleanor in this house was allowed. A maid could kick the eldest daughter of the barony to the floor and walk away, and the only one who would clean up after it was the girl bleeding on the boards. Eleanor stayed where she was for a moment, on her hands and knees on the floor. She pressed the cloth to her forehead and held it there, calm, the way she would hold a lid on a pot. She did not cry out. She waited, counting her own breaths, until the bleeding slowed and then stopped. There was a small dark pool of it on the boards. She wiped it up with the same rag she cleaned everything else with. She did it without thinking, the way she wiped any other stain, her own blood, gone in 2 strokes, as if she had never been there at all. Then she folded the cloth to the clean side, and she kept working. By midday, she had done more rooms than she could count, and there were more still waiting. She ate a torn scrap of bread standing up, fast, because if she missed the meal slot, it was taken away. The house was simply too large. She would not finish by evening with her hands alone, and if she did not finish, there was no medicine. So she reached for the gift again, and her mother's voice stopped her cold, the way it always did. No, not where they can see. Her hand hovered. Then she used it anyway. She steered the wind low along the floor to draw the dust into a line and let the water lift the dirt up out of the boards. Careful, leaving no shine that an eye could question. The rooms came clean behind her in half the time, and the whole while she felt sick with it, breaking the one rule her mother had given her, alone in a house that would punish her twice over if it ever knew. She had pushed it too far once. She remembered the day her legs had gone out from under her, and the floor had come up to meet her, the room tilting, the strength draining out of her hands like water through a crack. She had thought, lying there, that someone would help her up. No one had. She had been told plainly that if she had the time to lie down and sleep, she had the time to clean. So she had got up. She always got up. She had been very small the first time she used it. She remembered sweeping a little curl of dust across the floor with a flick of wind, proud of herself, looking up for someone to be pleased. Her mother had crossed the room at once and folded the small hand closed inside her own. Elise had not been angry. She was never angry. She was calm and a little far away, the way she always was, even with her own daughter. She had smoothed Eleanor's hair back and asked her for a promise. "Promise me you'll only do that when you're with me," she said. The child had asked why. Her mother only gave her a troubled smile and would not answer. Not then, not ever. She never spoke of the gift out loud, never named it, yet she treated the strange light in her daughter's hands as the most ordinary thing in the world, something to be kept close and quiet, like a coin sewn into a hem. So Eleanor had promised, because her mother had asked, and that was reason enough. She remembered, too, how far apart her mother and father had always stood. Elise and Edmund had shared a roof and little else. There had been no warmth between them that a child could see, only a careful, cool politeness, as if her mother were a guest in the house she was lady of. That same night, brushing out her hair before bed, Elise had told her the rest of it. "Eleanor, you're a good girl," she said softly. "I love you." She never explained the promise. She died not long after, suddenly, with no warning and no reason anyone would give, before the why was ever spoken aloud. And so the rule had outlived the woman who made it, and Eleanor still kept it, caged by a promise she did not understand, still wondering what her mother had known and what she had been so careful to hide. By the time the light went gold, the house was finished. It did not just look clean. The air in every room had gone clear and light, and the floors held a quiet depth no rag alone could give them. Margaret came down to inspect, the way she always did, walking the rooms with her eyes hunting for one thing she could punish. She ran a finger along a sill and held it to the window light. She looked into the corners where dust liked to hide. She crouched to check the seam where the floor met the wall. She found nothing, not a streak, not a film, not a smell. For once, she had nothing to say, and it plainly annoyed her, and she left without a word. She never once guessed why. None of them did. They despised the girl on her knees, and they leaned the whole weight of their house on her in the same breath, and the gift they would have punished her for was the only thing holding their walls up around them. The bargain that owned her had been struck a few days before, in her father's study. Noah's medicine bottle had gone nearly empty, fewer than 2 doses left, clear glass on a shelf, a little life measured out and running down. So she had gone to her father and asked him for the money. Edmund would not look at her. His eyes stopped somewhere around her shoulder. He told her flatly there was no money for that, and that what they did not have, they did not have, and he went back to his papers as if she had already left. Then Margaret had come in, soft and pleasant, and laid out her terms. She would pay for Noah's medicine, but only for the work Eleanor actually did, clean the whole house, every room alone, and she would keep the medicine in her own hands until the cleaning was finished. Her father looked at the wall while she said it. Eleanor had not argued. "I understand," she said. "I'll clean. I'll finish it. So please, give me the medicine." She would have agreed to anything. They both knew it. That was the whole reason it worked. The medicine never passed through Eleanor's hands. It was bought with Margaret's money, kept on Margaret's shelf, doled out by Margaret's word. There was no apothecary Eleanor could walk to, no coin of her own to spend there. As long as the bottle sat where she could not reach it, the family held the one thread that could pull her anywhere they wanted, and they knew exactly which thread it was. That night, when the work was done and the house was asleep, she went to look in on him. Noah lay small under the blanket, his breath catching the way it always did when the season turned. The fever had thinned his face. She set the back of her hand against his cheek, gentle, and his eyes opened halfway. "Big sister," he said. It was the only name he ever called her. She told him to go back to sleep and that she would bring his medicine in the morning. He asked, in a thread of a voice, whether she had eaten. She told him she had. It was not quite true, and he was too tired to catch it. He smiled at her, faint and trusting, and he was asleep again before she finished the sentence. He did not know what the morning's medicine had cost, that it was bought with a whole house scrubbed alone and a kick to the floor, and the secret she carried in her own 2 hands. He was too weak to carry the knowing, and she would not have let him carry it even if he could. She sat with him a while in the candlelight, her forehead still marked from the pillar, her hands still raw. In her own home, the home that should have been hers, there was no place for her anywhere, except here, on the edge of this small bed, in the dark, where the one person she had left still breathed. She would clean the whole house again tomorrow. She would pay any price they named. For him, she always would. The carriage came at first light, and it did not belong to House Vance. Eleanor saw it from a corridor window while she worked. Black lacquer, 4 horses, the king's crest stamped in gold on the door. She knew, before anyone told her, that it had come for her. She was called to the study. Edmund sat behind his desk with a letter open in front of him, and he did not look up as he spoke. He told her, low and flat, that an edict had come from the crown. Daughters of fitting age were to be sent into royal service as paid maids. House Vance would be paid while she served. The palace would cover the cost of Noah's medicine for the whole of it. He said it the way a man reads out a sum. No hesitation in it, no weight. As if he were spending a coin he had been keeping in a drawer. Margaret stood by the cold hearth and added the rest. The family would be saved thanks to Eleanor, she said. Securing Noah's medicine was no small thing. Surely Eleanor could see that. And a girl her age could not be kept at home forever. For Noah's sake, it was the only sensible choice. She made it sound like a kindness. She made it sound like Eleanor was being given something. Eleanor stood very still and let the words land. There was a name for what this was, and it was not service. They were selling the use of her and tying the one chain she would never break, Noah's medicine, to the far end of it, so she could not say no. She did not try to. There was no reason left to refuse. I understand, she said. That was all they wanted. Edmund went back to his letter. Margaret's shoulders eased with the relief of a problem set down. Eleanor bowed her head and went out, and the corridor she had cleaned 10,000 times felt, for the first time, like a place she was already leaving. That night, she went to him. Noah was awake, small under his blanket, the candle pulling a little color into his face. She sat on the edge of his bed, the way she had 1,000 times, and for a while, she only smoothed the cover over his thin chest and let the quiet hold. Can we talk a little? She said. He nodded against the pillow. She kept her voice even, the way she had practiced all afternoon so it would not break. She told him she would be leaving home for a while. To the castle, she said, when he asked where. A long way off, in the capital. He understood faster than she wanted him to. His face crumpled before she finished, and his hand came out from under the blanket and gripped a fold of her dress. No, he whispered. Big sister, don't go. She did not answer right away. She had no answer that was both true and kind. Will you? He tried, and his breath hitched. Will you come back soon? There it was, the one question. The whole farewell stood inside it, and she could not give him the easy word because she did not know if it was a lie, and she had never once lied to him. So she gathered him in instead. She held him against her, his face hot and wet at her collar, his small fists knotted in her dress, and she let him cry himself out where no one else would hear. She pressed her cheek to the top of his head. She breathed him in. Noah, she said quietly, you're a good boy. I love you. She did not say she would come back. She said the thing she could promise, and nothing she could not, and she held him until the candle guttered low and his grip loosened toward sleep, and the words still sounded, even to her, like goodbye. She woke before the house, the way she always had. There was little to pack, 2 changes of clothes, a familiar cloth, folded soft from years of use, and her mother's sewing kit, the one thing of Elise's that had ever been hers to keep. The bag was barely half full when she tied it shut, 18 years in a place, and it fit in a sack a child could carry. She should have stopped there. She could not. Out of habit, out of something she had no other word for, she cleaned the house one last time. The corners of the corridor, the stair rail, run smooth under her cloth, the frames of the windows where the dust gathered. Her hands knew the work without her, and there was a strange safety in it. The one thing in this house that had ever answered to her, doing as it was told one final time. She wiped the servant's back door last and washed her hands at the basin and dried them, and that was done. Cleaning had been her work. She would leave it finished. She did not know, none of them knew, that this was the last morning the house would smell of nothing at all, that the quiet gift folded into her every motion had held the rot off these rooms for years, and was about to walk out the back door and not come back. The boards would gleam a few weeks more on memory alone. Then they would begin, very slowly, to sour. She picked up the half-empty bag and went to the entrance. The carriage waited where it had the morning before, the driver already on his bench, silent. No one else stood at the door, no mother, no father at the window, no brother small in the entrance. No one had come to see her off, and she found she had expected that, and that it did not even sting the way it should have. It was fitting, she thought, for what they had made of her. She started toward the carriage, then stopped, and turned, and looked up. 2nd floor, the window on the left. Noah's room, the curtain still drawn against the cold. Behind it, a boy who would wake soon and find her gone. She stood in the gray light and looked at that one dark square of glass for a long moment. I'm going now, she told him, without a sound. Be well. Be here when I find the way back. Then she climbed into the carriage and pulled the door, and the driver clicked to the horses, and House Vance began to slide away behind her. The manor, the gate, the only home she had ever known, shrinking against the pale pale sky until the road bent and took it from her entirely. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that tears were a sound someone might notice. She faced forward instead, toward a capital she had never seen, and let the home behind her go. 2 other girls shared the carriage. They were her own age, and they had not stopped whispering since the last village. How many maids would the palace take this time? How much coin a family got for sending one? One of them said her people needed the money badly. The other answered that the work would be hard for that kind of pay, but that serving at the royal castle, with no name and no connections, was a chance that came once in a life. Eleanor sat across from them and said nothing. There was nothing she wanted to add. She had not been sent for a chance. She had been sent for the medicine and the coin, the same as a sold horse, and there was no point pretending otherwise to strangers. The road ran smooth and paved, the traffic thickening as the hours passed, and then one of the girls went quiet and pointed. A wall, long and gray, low on the horizon at first, and then it rose and kept rising, and Eleanor understood she was not looking at a wall at all. Gray stone climbed and spread until it filled the window, tall and wide as no building had any right to be. It was not a castle. It was a city pretending to be one. Towers balanced against towers, gates carved deep into stone that had stood 1,000 years. Something turned over hard in her chest. Fear or awe. She could not tell them apart. She caught her own fingers moving in her lap, pinching at nothing. The old motion of pushing a needle through cloth, a habit her hands had kept from her mother without asking her permission. She made them be still. She knew no letters. She knew no court, no etiquette, none of the manners that ran a place like this. The gap between what she was and what waited behind that wall was wide enough to fall into. But there was one thing. No one alive cleaned the way she did. That was hers. No castle, however large, could take it from her. It's all right, she told herself, as the gate swung open ahead. I'm sure of my cleaning. Inside the gate, her first thought betrayed her. How on earth did anyone keep all this clean? High white ceilings, carved arches, carpet so deep it swallowed her footsteps whole. People here spoke low, out of habit and rule. As a steward led her down a corridor, she heard the whispers anyway, that another one had quit, the princess's attendant again, that no one seemed to last in that post, that they had lost count of how many that made. She filed it away and kept walking. Then they called her name, Eleanor of House Vance, into a reception room where palace officials waited in a row, and a woman stood at their center with the bearing of someone the whole staff answered to, the headmaid, Agnes, calm, straight-backed, a face that gave away nothing as she looked Eleanor over once, slowly, as if reading a page. Eleanor braced for the scrubbing pool. A castle this size would have 100 girls on their knees in the lower halls, and she had come expecting to be one more, lost among them, and content enough to be. What Agnes said instead, she did not expect. From today, I appoint you the princess's attendant maid. For a breath, Eleanor did not understand the words. An attendant, to the princess herself, not a scrubber in a back hall, but the personal maid of the woman this whole stone city orbited. She, who came with nothing but chapped hands and a sack half full. It made no sense. Surely there had been a mistake, or a test she could not see the shape of. But the headmaid's eyes were steady, and there was no mistake in them. Somehow, in one slow look, this woman had seen the thing House Vance had spent years grinding into the floor and refusing to name, that whatever was put in front of Eleanor, she would not break. I will serve faithfully, Eleanor said, and bowed. And under the bow, where no one could read it, something she had no name for moved in her chest. She had been used her whole life, spent, taken, made to. She had never once, not in 18 years, been chosen for what she could do. For the first time, the tide pulled, very faintly, the other way. They showed her to a room, modest but better furnished than any maid's quarters she had pictured, and they gave her a uniform, thick pale cloth, well cut, flawless, nothing like the worn gray dress she had arrived in. She held it a moment, almost afraid to mark it. May I wear this? She asked, and the steward only nodded, as though it were a strange thing to ask. When she put it on, something shifted. Her spine drew straight on its own. The fabric sat clean and even on her shoulders, and the girl in it was not quite the one who had cleaned a corridor in the dark that morning. She did not feel like a different person. She felt, for one quiet moment, like a person at all. They led her on to the princess's rooms so she would know her ground. A living room, a bedroom, a bath, and a study. She decided at a glance not to so much as touch without leave being given. Then she set out to find the headmaid's office, because the work could not start without tools, and the work was the only thing she trusted to carry her through. She turned a door at the corner of the corridor and nearly walked into someone, a woman, and Eleanor's breath stopped of its own accord. She was beautiful in a way Eleanor had no measure for. Tall, serene, a pale hem moving around her like water, a sweet, faint scent that arrived a half step before she did. Everything about her said this was no maid, no steward, no one who scrubbed a floor in her life. "Excuse me," Eleanor said quickly, and stepped back and bowed. The woman did not speak. She only looked at Eleanor closely, longer than a stranger in a hallway had any cause to, her eyes moving over her with a quiet, weighing attention, as if she were the one thing in the corridor worth studying. Then her mouth curved into a small smile, and she passed by and was gone, and the sweet scent went with her. Eleanor straightened and walked on toward the office, her heart still oddly fast, turning the face over in her mind. Someone of high rank, surely, a noble guest, perhaps a lady of the court she would learn to keep clear of. It did not once occur to her, could not have, in that hushed and gleaming place where nothing yet made sense, that the woman who had stood so close and studied her so long and walked away without a single word was the princess she had just been sent to serve. Eleanor closed the bedroom door behind her, and the air met her like a held breath that had never been let out. She stood still and read the room the way she read every room, not by its dust, but by what it was for. This was a place for sleeping, for resting, for breathing through a long night. And it could not breathe. The air sat heavy and close, dead in a way no open window had ever touched, as if no one had truly lived here in a long while. On her way in, she had passed two servants who dropped their voices when they saw her. The princess was cruel, they said. She threw maids out on a whim. None of them lasted. Eleanor heard it and let it run off her like water off a sill. She had been warned about hard masters her whole life. She would judge this one by the room, not by the talk. She had already been to Agnes for her tools and her limits. The head maid told her plainly that she could enter the study, but must never touch the papers or the desk. Everything else was hers to set right. So she started where it mattered most. Sunk deep into the rug beside the bed was a reddish-purple stain, spilled berry juice, dried hard, with the smeared edge of someone who had wiped at it once and only driven the color deeper. Water would spread it. Scrubbing would fray the fibers. She knelt, wrung a cloth until it was barely damp, and pressed from the outside in, lifting the color a shade at a time. It took longer than it should have. She did not hurry it. Not damaging the room mattered more to her than finishing it fast. When the mark was only a ghost of itself, she turned to the rest. She gathered the dust off the canopy into one soft clump and carried it away without scattering a mote. She eased the wrinkles from the cloth above the bed, and then she did the thing the room needed most, the thing no bucket or brush could reach. She lifted the heavy dead weight out of the air itself. It came slowly, the way a fogged window clears. The closeness thinned. The staleness drained off. She could feel it go, the weight peeling up off the floor and out through the cracked sash. The way a held breath finally leaves a chest. The room seemed to loosen, to settle, to draw its first easy breath in months, until the space that had felt like a sealed box felt, all at once, like somewhere a person could live. This was the part she trusted in herself when she trusted nothing else. She knew no letters and no court manners, and she had no kind words saved up from anyone in the world. But she was sure of this. A room could be sour and shut and forgotten, and she could make it whole, and no one would ever have to know it was her. Eleanor stepped back and let out a slow breath of her own, the stain gone, the dust gone, the canopy swaying a little in clean, light air. She folded her cloth to move on, and as she turned, a faint brightness flickered at its edge, there and then not there, like a coal catching and dying in the same instant. She did not look at it. She had spent her whole life not looking at it. She had been taught, young and harshly, that the safest thing her hands could do was leave no sign they had done anything at all. She tucked the cloth away, and the light was gone as though it had never been. The study asked the opposite of the bedroom. Here, she had power she could not use. She read it from the doorway before she touched a thing. Papers stacked in careful piles. A chair left a little askew. Dust worn thin along the floor in narrow paths. The tracks of someone who worked here often and walked the same lines doing it. One stirred breath of wind would scatter a season of someone's work across the room. So she held the wind back. She cracked the window just enough to let the stale air bleed out and a thin cold current in, and no more. She pressed the floor clean with a damp cloth instead of dragging it, so not a single mote lifted. She wiped only the edges of the shelves with the corner of the cloth, never the spines, never the pages. The faint scent of old paper she left exactly where it was. It belonged here. Near the desk leg, a blue-black ink stain had set into the wood. She blotted it from the edges inward, warming the cloth a touch so the ink let go more easily, holding the surface steady so the damp never spread. It faded. It would not lift all the way, and she let it be. Some marks did not come out, and good work knew the difference. She checked from the doorway that nothing had moved. Nothing had. Only then did she notice the small wall clock had run further than she thought. She steadied her breath. There was still the reception room, and that was the one room where her work would finally be seen. She had left this room for last on purpose. It was not where the princess slept, or worked, or breathed through the night, only where she received guests. By Eleanor's order of things, the rooms that kept a person living came first, and the room that merely faced the world came last. A drink had been spilled on the pale upholstery, and only half wiped before. She knelt, worked it with the grain of the cloth, several passes, outside in, until the mark all but vanished. For a room meant to greet visitors, she thought, it should never have been left this long. She let out a small breath of relief as the stain gave way, and that was when she heard the footsteps. They came down the hall steady and even, unhurried, nothing like a maid's quick step. Someone who did not need to rush anywhere they went. The owner of these rooms had come back early. Eleanor kept her head down and kept working. She did not look up. The princess stopped in the doorway and took in the room, the most visible room in her quarters, left for last, the maid still kneeling at unfinished work. It was the woman from the corridor, the one who had studied Eleanor's face and walked away without a word. Catherine, the princess she had been sent to serve. And Catherine, primed by the very gossip Eleanor had let pass, read the half-done room as proof of it. The talk had reached the new maid too, she decided, and the new maid had believed it. Why else save the princess's own rooms for last, as if they could wait, as if a girl who would not last the month could put them off? She said as much, her voice low and hard, and she did not ask it as a question, she accused. Eleanor set down her cloth and answered level. I had no such thought, she said. Cleaning was the work she had been given. Nothing more, nothing less. It made no difference. Catherine pointed at the unfinished stain as if it settled everything, and it did. Go back to your room, she said. She would decide what to do with the maid in the morning. Eleanor bowed. She apologized, not for a reason, only because it was expected, and she left the work where it lay and went. She did not argue. She did not plead her order of the rooms, or the heavy air she had carried out of the bedroom, or the hours it had cost her. She had been chosen for the first time in her life, and now she was being thrown back, and the second thing was as familiar as the first was strange. She had been judged without a hearing more times than she could count. One more would not break her. Catherine walked back to her bedroom to put the whole thing out of her mind and stopped dead at the threshold. The air was wrong, or rather, it was right, and that was what stopped her. The canopy hung smooth, the dust was gone, the floor was clean, and the heavy, lived-in weight the room had always carried. The close press she had known so long she had stopped noticing it was simply not there. The room felt almost too clean to have ever been slept in. Her eyes went to the floor, hunting for the one fixed thing, the berry stain she was certain marked the boards by the bed. It was not there, not hidden, not faded. Gone, as if it had never sat there at all. She could not let it rest. That night, she went looking for the truth, and it came easily and all at once. The spill had never been the maid's doing. Her own brother had brought her juice during a thunderstorm nights before, knowing how she feared the thunder, had tripped in the dark and spilled it across her floor, and left it for the morning because the hour was late and he had nothing to clean it with. He told her so plainly. Puzzled, she would ask. And then he said the thing that turned her cold. That room had always sat heavy on his chest. He had never been able to stay in it long, but now, standing in it, he breathed easy. It was lighter, he said. It was easier to breathe. Catherine stood in her own breathable room and understood what she had done. She had scolded a maid for a mess that was never hers, and worse, for setting right something no ordinary pair of hands could have touched. Late that night, Catherine went to Agnes, which she almost never did, and she brought two questions. How had this maid been chosen? And where had the rumor about her own cruelty begun? Agnes answered both without flinching. The rumor was hers. She had planted it herself and let it run through the wing on purpose. A filter to weed out the maids who would buckle under unfair talk or take a side on hearsay before they had ever met the woman they served. Eleanor had been the last candidate. She was the only one who passed, not by cleverness, not by charm, by meeting an unkind word with silence and a steady face, and never once trading on the gossip she had every chance to repeat. Catherine remembered then the way the maid had knelt and said only that cleaning was the work she had been given. Nothing more, nothing less. No defense, no plea. She had taken the blame whole and walked out under it without a single word for herself. I judged her, Catherine said quietly, before I had seen anything or heard anything or confirmed one thing. In the morning, she would set it right, not as a princess correcting a servant, as a person who had been wrong. Agnes said nothing to that. She only inclined her head, satisfied, and let the princess go. Catherine woke to find the reception room perfectly finished. The stain was gone, the upholstery clean, every surface set right. Completed, it seemed, while she slept, after a dismissal that should have ended it. The maid she had sent away had come back in the night and finished the work she was no longer being kept to do. And then Eleanor arrived to attend her, composed and quiet, as if the day before had never happened. Catherine asked if she had eaten. Eleanor said she had. It came out, gently pressed, that she had eaten a single biscuit left over from the day before and nothing else. The princess went still at that. Servants were fed only after the royal family, she said, and that for this one would change. She would not have her own maid kneeling all day on a biscuit. Then she did the thing. She faced her own maid, and she said she was sorry. Sorry for her anger, sorry for the judgment she had no right to make. And she bowed her head, a princess, to the girl who scrubbed her floors. Eleanor did not gloat. She did not soften into tears or seize the moment. She took the apology the way she took everything, with a small, level nod, neither clutching it nor pushing it away. She had been blamed in 100 rooms by people who never once came back to take it off her. They did not apologize, the people who threw her away. That was the rule she had grown up inside. And here was a princess with her head bent, saying the words to a maid she could have simply replaced and forgotten. Something in Eleanor went very still, the way it did when a thing she had decided about the world turned out not to be the whole of it. But she let none of it reach her face. It was enough that it had been said. She had not expected even that much, and she had learned long ago not to lean on a kindness in case it was pulled away. Catherine asked her, then, why she had cleaned in that order. Study, bedroom, the reception room last, when last was what had ruined her. And Eleanor told her, simply, dirt was only a result. She did not tend a room by how it looked from the door. She tended it by what it was for. The rooms a person lived and breathed in came first. The room that only faced the world could wait. She added one more thing, quiet, almost an afterthought, that she only ever did what a room truly needed, and never more than that. She had been taught, young, that the quietest work was the safest. Where another maid would have left a sign of every effort, Eleanor left none. And Catherine, watching her, understood at last that the empty trace was not a lack of skill. It was control, a discipline she had mistaken for one whole day for insolence. I would like, Catherine said, and she said it as a wish, not a command, to spend time with you, to understand you. Eleanor only inclined her head and accepted it as quietly as she accepted everything else. Catherine watched her go back to her work. The maid had never been the danger in these rooms. The danger had only ever been a princess who knew nothing, judging a woman she had never once looked at. That was over now. For the first time, someone with power in this castle had bent their head to the discarded girl and called her worth by its name. And this time, unlike every other time Eleanor had been chosen, it was not going to be taken back. The file was thin. That was the first wrong thing about it. Catherine had asked for everything House Vance filed when Eleanor entered palace service, and what Agnes laid open on the desk was a single servant ledger, a few lines of ink for 18 years of a life. Eldest daughter of a baron, sent into service, the entry said, owing to the family's financial difficulties. Then the blank. The field for the magic measurement carried no number, no date, nothing at all. Every other attendant in the castle had a reading on that line. Eleanor had an empty box. Catherine asked about it, and Agnes answered the way she answered everything, precisely, with no more words than the question needed. In Eleanor's case, measurement had been judged unnecessary. Catherine read further. The assigned hours stopped her again. A wing this size was kept by a team. The palace scaled the labor on the assumption that magic eased it. The ledger gave Eleanor no helper and no magic, and every task on the list belonged to her alone. There's nothing here on the household, Catherine said. The mother dead years ago, the father living. The rest of it, a careful, deliberate nothing. Agnes did not look up from the page. She offered to ask the senior staff what the paper left out. The offer itself was an answer. Catherine closed the ledger and kept her hand flat on the cover a moment. She was not building a case against the girl, she told the headmaid. She was building one for her. That same afternoon, walking her wing with Eleanor a step behind, Catherine felt it, a faint stir of magic moving through the air at a distance, the kind almost no one alive could sense. Behind her, Eleanor stopped dead. Her breath went shallow. Her fingers curled tight against her own palm, hard. An answer started and then strangled before it could finish. It was not fear. It was a reflex worn so smooth by years that the body did it without being asked. Catherine turned. "What was that?" Eleanor apologized. She offered nothing else. But Catherine had seen the hand close, had seen the girl begin to reach for the thing in the air and then crush the reaching flat. So she asked it plainly. Could Eleanor not use magic at all? A hesitation. Then the correction, quiet and exact. Not cannot, must not. Who told you that? Her mother, years dead now. And still the rule held her hands shut in a corridor where no one would have punished her for opening them. Catherine felt the cold come up in her, like rising water. She held it down. If it showed on her face, the girl would fold back into silence and stay there, and the silence was the whole crime. So she only nodded and turned and walked on. Nothing was said. Everything had moved. After that, Catherine stopped reading like a princess and started reading like an investigator. Her brother helped without being asked twice. Adrian commanded a quiet network of the crown's own people, men who looked into things and left no trace on paper, and he turned them on a baron's house. What came back was colder than the ledger. The household accounts told the rest of it in numbers. Every coin spent on schooling had gone to the stepsister, Vanessa. Tutors, music, etiquette, a new wardrobe each season. Beside Eleanor's name, the same empty column, year after year. The family had even written down the reason in their own hand. The eldest was the housekeeper, and learning was unnecessary for her. The medical records were worse for how tidy they were. Every injury logged the same way: a fall, a slip, a mishap at work, and the clusters of them rose with the heaviest seasons of labor. No physician ever wrote down a doubt. The explanations were simple, and the patient never contradicted them, so on paper, there was nothing to see. A young woman worked past safety for years, and every wound of it filed under accident. And the application, the one the law required a guardian to file so a child could be measured, had never been submitted. No filing, no consultation, not even a question put to the church. Catherine read the statute twice. No one in that house had broken a law. They had simply declined to lift the one finger that would have given Eleanor a claim. She understood the motive then, whole. A measured daughter had standing, prospects, a future a family owed something to. An unmeasured one was only a free pair of hands. The blank was not an oversight. A blank was a choice. Agnes set down the last page, a line tracking the steady cost of medicine for a sickly younger brother, the boy Eleanor had left behind. The family paid it in careful sums. A lever, kept oiled, for whenever they might need to pull her back. Catherine signed an order to open House Vance to investigation. She kept her hand from shaking until the ink was dry. She did not march on the family. She did the one thing the family had never once done. She gave Eleanor a choice. After the morning's work, she drew her aside into the reception room and seated her at an angle, not across the table, not face down, only beside. She made it plain this was no scolding and no test. Then she said it. Eleanor could decide for herself whether to have her magic measured, not a command. Either answer accepted. Eleanor folded her fingers on her knees, the way she did when she was thinking. The question she asked was small. Was it required? Normally, a parent decided such things, Catherine told her. But here, as the princess's own attendant, the choice was hers, and Catherine stood in a position to see it respected. The second question came slower. What would change if she were measured? Catherine answered honestly, which was its own kind of gift. How others saw her might change, her standing, even what people called her worth. And no one could promise that any of it led to happiness. There was no need to answer now, Catherine added. Choosing not to choose was also a right, one that belonged to her. For a long moment, Eleanor only sat with her hands folded, a girl turning over a thing she had never been handed before. She said she would think about it. It was, though neither of them said so, the first time in her life anyone had set a real decision in front of her and left it there for her to take. That evening, her work was light, and she finished early, and no one demanded the rest of her hours. She cleaned her tools out of habit. She washed her hands out of habit. Then she sat in a room that asked nothing of her, and that emptiness was the loudest thing she had felt in years. The words turned in her chest like a stone. Magic measurement, and under them, older, her mother's voice. Never use it where they can see. Never let them measure you, because the gifted are taken away. Elise had said it gently, every time, and never once said why. Eleanor had built her whole self around it. Smother the thing before it stirred. Move her body where the gift would have done the work. Still the very air before it could hum. At the Vance house, no one had ever measured her. She understood now that it had been on purpose, that she had been kept blank so she could be kept useful. The thought should have frightened her, and part of it did, but she turned it over and over the way she turned a stain in the light to find its edge, and the more she looked, the less the fear held its shape. Instead, something else rose up beside it, small and unfamiliar and warm. Here, no one struck her for being slow. No one threw her out for being silent. No one had raised a hand to her since the day she arrived. She breathed in deep to steady herself, and she did it the way her mother taught her, without a thread of magic, deliberately, until the air around her went still and obedient. The promise had kept her alive, but the woman who made it was gone, and the danger she feared had never come. And here, for the first time, a door stood open that no one was forcing her through. She would let them measure her, not because she was told to, because she had decided. They did it at dawn, when a day's magic is lowest and a reading is truest. The room was plain and white, a single circle inlaid in the pale floor, built for accuracy, not to frighten anyone. Catherine stood to one side. Agnes stood near the door. The crown's measuring official waited by the circle and asked Eleanor to place her hand. She was not afraid. She had chosen this. She set her palm to the stone. The first reading came back below average. The official frowned at it. The number sat wrong against everything he could feel standing this close to her, and he checked the device as though it had failed. Then Eleanor let her fingers ease, just slightly. A lifetime of holding the gift down, loosened by the width of a breath. She had never let it out where anyone could see. Not once in all the years. Some part of her still waited for the blow that her mother's voice promised would follow. The punishment, the taking away. She kept her eyes on her own hand and let the gift come anyway. And it came not like a flood, but like a held breath finally set free. Light spilled out of her palm. Not a glare, not a blaze. Warm, soft, the color of early sun, coming through a window onto a freshly cleaned floor. It welled up around her hand and rose, and it filled the white room corner to corner, and it asked nothing of anyone in it. There was no heat in it and no weight. It was the cleanest thing any of them had ever stood inside. Catherine did not move. Agnes did not breathe. Even the air seemed to go quiet and clear, the way a room went quiet when Eleanor had finished with it. The light held there a long moment, gentle and enormous, and entirely without force, and then it eased back into her hand, and the circle settled with it. The official read the output again, small, unremarkable, a quantity that meant nothing. Then he read the other line, and his voice changed. The attribute is light, he said. And the purity? He stopped. He read it a third time. The purity is past anything I have on record. It is, his mouth worked. More than that, it is almost, he did not finish. Whatever the number pointed toward, he chose not to say it aloud, and he assigned no danger to it, and he stepped back from the circle as if he had looked too long at the sun. In the old text, there was a name for light this clean, hallowed light. It was not the amount of it that mattered. The amount was nothing. It was that there was no flaw in it at all, no interference, nothing muddying the source. The girl her family had logged as a blank, as a free pair of hands, as a daughter not worth measuring, had carried that the whole time and had been ordered her whole life to crush it back down into her palm. She had never been weak. She had only been buried. Eleanor lifted her hand from the stone. She asked one thing and only one. Had anything about her changed? No, Catherine told her. You haven't changed at all. And in the quiet that followed, Catherine made a decision of her own, to bury the true scale of that reading, deep, where no one could dig it up. Not the way the family had buried the girl, the other way, to keep her safe until she could choose what to do with what she was. After that, nothing changed. And that was the work. Catherine sealed the result and let the days run exactly as before. The measuring official, Agnes reported, had gone strangely careful, plainly afraid to so much as glance again at what he had seen. But the secret held. Eleanor asked for nothing and claimed nothing and worked her wing the way she always had. Once, straightening a curtain, her hand paused for the space of a heartbeat. Catherine was watching her from the doorway, saying nothing, and Eleanor had felt her there without turning, the way she felt everything, an ear and an instinct sharpened by a life that punished the unprepared. No one had ever taught her that. It was simply hers. The light had been seen. It did not need to shine yet. The prince noticed her before he knew he had. Adrian came through his sister's wing on his own business and found a maid cleaning a corridor with no wasted motion and no sound at all. and he could not, for a moment, look away. He caught the instant her hand began to reach for magic and stopped itself, that same trained flinch, and he understood it was not a servant's polish, but the habit of someone who had spent a whole life trying not to be seen. He did not pry. On his way out, he told Catherine only one thing about the maid: do not rush her. He came back through more than once after that. He told himself it was the way of the corridors. Walking with his sister another afternoon, he remarked that she had picked up a good maid, and Catherine corrected him at once. She had not picked her up. The girl had always been there. Catherine had simply failed to look, and now that she had looked, she would not let her go. When Adrian did finally trade a few words with Eleanor, what struck him was everything she did not do. She did not flatter him. She did not sell her own usefulness or angle for a thing. She only existed beside him, expecting nothing, and after a lifetime of people who wanted something, it was the easiest air he had breathed in years. That night, walking the dark and quiet wing alone, he tested the thought of her gone and found it left a hole he did not like. Not wanting, exactly. Not the urge to protect. Only that losing her would be a genuine loss. He did not deny the feeling. Denying it, he suspected, would only set it deeper. He smiled at himself in the empty corridor, the air around him clean and settled and hers, and admitted he would likely stop for her again. The floor would not come clean. Greta had wiped the entrance hall of House Vance once already that morning, the way she had wiped it every morning for years, and the stone behind her hand had come up wet again before she reached the far door. It was not spilled water. It was not rain carried in on someone's boots. The damp rose out of the stone itself, dark and slow, beating up between the joints where the polish should have held, and across the wide floor it had left marks. Long, dragging streaks, faint as a smear of grease, running from the threshold inward, as if something had crawled over the doorstep in the night and pulled itself across the hall on its belly. She crouched and laid 2 fingers on the nearest one. It smeared under her touch, cold, and would not lift. She wiped it with the cloth. It came back darker. For years, this house had run on her hands, and a dozen like them, and the floors had always taken a cloth and gone bright by breakfast. She wiped the streak a 3rd time, harder, and the cold of it climbed into her wrist and sat there. She told herself the season had turned. She told herself the old walls had only caught the autumn damp the way old walls did. She wrung the cloth into the bucket, and the water in the bucket had gone gray, and she carried it down the hall and made herself not look back at the door. By midday, the heaviness had come inside. It reached the hallways first, and then the drawing room, a thickness in the air that pressed flat on the chest, like a thin, wet film laid over the lungs, so that every breath came up shorter than the one before it. Greta had every window in the room thrown open, and the curtains dragged back on their rings to let the house breathe. The air did not stir, not a curtain lifted. She had incense lit and kept lit, one bowl and then another and another, until pale smoke hung in long, unmoving ropes from wall to wall, and still, underneath the incense, the other smell would not go. A low, soft rot, the smell that comes off water that has stood too long in the dark. 2 of the younger maids worked the room beside her. One of them straightened up from the cold hearth with the flat of her hand pressed to her breastbone, and said they had done all of it twice over now, the cleaning and the airing and the rest, and none of it had changed a thing. Another said, quietly, that it had never been like this before. No one answered her, because there was no answer. They had all felt the same thing, and none of them had the word for it. The plain sense that something had been lifted out of the house, some quiet thing that had always been here, and had always, without anyone marking it, kept the rooms open and the air clean. They scrubbed and aired and burned the incense down to ash through the whole afternoon, and the manor only seemed to grow heavier around them as they worked, as though the house were drinking the effort and giving nothing back. By night, the house had gone silent in a way it never had before. In a back room off the kitchens, a servant began to cough and could not stop, a dry, climbing cough that doubled him over the table, while the others stood around him and did not know what to bring. On the wall, a lamp guttered and shook, the flame ducking low and springing up again, though every window in the house was shut fast, and there was no wind anywhere in the rooms to move it. A maid put out her hand to steady it, and then drew the hand back without touching the glass, as if the flame had told her not to. None of them would say the word. They had circled it for a full day now, all of them, and not one would put it into the air, half certain, in the animal way, that to name the wrongness aloud was to give it leave to grow. So they finished their rounds by guttering light, and went to their beds, and the manor settled over them through the whole night, silent and hideously heavy. Heavy in a way no cloth had ever touched. heavy the way a house goes heavy when the thing that kept it breathing has walked out through its door and not come back. By the next morning, the talk had already left the walls. It went out through the kitchen gate and the market stalls and the mouths of the carters who came and went, and it ran the way that kind of talk always runs, faster than any sealed letter. House Vance was failing. The air inside it had gone wrong and would not be put right, not by cleaning, not by hired hands, not by anything anyone had tried, and no one in the city could say why. In the princess's palace, the air was clean. Eleanor noticed it the way she noticed everything now, without meaning to and without showing it. She drew one slow breath at the workroom window, and the breath went all the way down, easy, with nothing in it to catch on. And the late light lay flat and bright across the swept floor, even and untroubled, with no wrongness anywhere in it. Here the rooms still settled under a cloth. Here they still went clean and stayed clean. Agnes brought the morning report and gave it the way she gave everything, plainly and without flourish. Nothing amiss in the palace, and no rumor worth the name come near the household. Eleanor thanked her and closed the report. But the other rumor reached her anyway, the way the worst of them always did, carried in on the edges of a dozen smaller errands. House Vance was rotting. The air there had turned heavy and would not lift, and they had thrown open the windows and burned incense, and brought in more hands, and changed nothing at all. She stood at the window a long while after Agnes had gone. She thought of the floors she had wiped in that house every morning before the family woke, the rooms she had always left a shade cleaner than they had any right to be, without once understanding why, the air in those halls that had simply never smelled of anything while she lived under that roof. She had carried something in that house for years. She had had no name for it then. She had a name for it now, and only a few people drawing breath knew it. The light she had been taught, her whole childhood, to fold down small and smother, and never, ever let a soul see. It had not been taken from House Vance. It had not been stopped or broken. It had only left. The day they put her out the gate, it had walked out with her on her own 2 feet, and the house had not known enough to mourn the right thing. The light would not return to that house, but the reason it was lost, that was about to be dragged out into the open, where every eye at court could turn and look at it. The letter came 2 days later, sealed in wax with the Vance crest. Catherine knew the shape of it before her thumb broke the seal. She read it through once, quickly, and laid it flat on the desk. Denied, she said, before Agnes, by the door, could even ask whether there would be a reply at all. It was a courteous letter. It spoke of housekeeping that could no longer keep its pace, of rooms grown hard to manage, of the family's pressing need for someone who truly understood the running of a great house. And it asked very politely that the eldest daughter be returned to them. It never once wrote the word light. It never named the thing they had actually lost. It named the cleaning, and only the cleaning, as though a bucket and a steady pair of arms were what had walked out of their gate and left the air to spoil. Adrian came in without knocking, saw the crest under his sister's hand, and read the thing over her shoulder. His mouth went thin. If the trouble were honestly the cleaning, he said, they could hire 10 more servants by nightfall and have done with it. They had cut away every part of her that did not suit them, kept the hands, never the daughter, and now they wanted the hands back in the house and would not say the real reason why. Send her back, Catherine said, and it would simply begin again. The same use, dressed as the same need, with no end to it. She would write the reply herself. Adrian asked, dry, whether she wanted it sharp. As sharp as it needed to be, she told him. And then she said the part that mattered more than the letter, that this had stopped being one family's private quarrel. Others at court had started to look hard at House Vance, and to see it plainly for the first time. The crack had opened, and it was showing now in the open, where a noble house could not paper it over. They did not take the refusal quietly. The day after the crown's answer went out under seal, a messenger came up to the palace gate in the Vance colors. Agnes held him at the gate and carried his words herself to Adrian's study, where Catherine had already come, and where Adrian had half read the shape of it from her face before Agnes had finished speaking. The message was short, and it was filthy. If the matter went on, if the daughter was not sent home, the family could no longer see to the boy's treatment, Noah, the sick child, his medicine made into a thing they could withhold. And this, the messenger added at the end, was a family affair, and wanted no interference from anyone outside the blood. For a moment, no one in the study said anything at all. They have taken the boy hostage, Adrian said finally, very low. A sick child set down on the table, like a coin to be spent, laid there for the single purpose of dragging his sister back into a house that was rotting around the very people who had hollowed it out. Catherine felt the cold of it go straight down through her chest, and she held her anger down hard, where it might still be made need to do some good. Agnes stood unmoving by the door. The investigation, Adrian told them both, was nearly finished now. The household records, the ledgers, the long, quiet years of them, almost all of it gathered in. Soon the evidence would be whole. Then they would not answer this with anger, Catherine said, and they would not answer it with procedure. They would answer it with facts that could not be argued away. The family believed they were winning a small private fight. They were not. Brick by brick, and with their own hands, they were laying up the case that would one day come down on top of them. And they did not even see that they were the ones carrying the bricks. That night, after the work was done, Catherine called Eleanor to the sitting room. She told her plainly, because there was no kind way to fold it smaller. The family had made contact. They wanted her returned to the house, and when the Crown refused them, they had reached for Noah. They had said the boy's treatment would stop unless she came home. Eleanor stood very still. Whatever went through her at her brother's name went through fast and went down deep, and her hands closed once at her sides and then were still again. For nearly all of her life, that single sentence would have ended the conversation where it stood. She would already have been turning for her cloak, already counting the hours of the road. The boy was the one lever that had never failed them, the one cord they could always pull to walk her back through any door they pleased, and they knew it, and they had pulled it now because it had always been enough. She did not turn for the cloak. "May I tell you," she said, "something I have never told a living soul." Then she told Catherine what her work in that house had truly done, that it had never been the cleaning, that for years, with no name for it and no intention behind it, she had kept the air in those rooms from turning, had held something back from the walls every single morning, the way a person leans a door shut without thinking about the weight on the other side. The heaviness sitting in House Vance now was only what had come in the moment she stopped. She did not say how much of it she had carried. She did not raise a hand to measure it in the air. She only set the fact down, bare, where Catherine could take it up and use it. If she went back, she said, the house would breathe again by the next morning, and she would be once more exactly what she had always been inside those walls. A pair of hands no one would ever trouble to name, used until the day they decided to throw her out for good. And Noah would still be sick, and he would still be theirs to threaten every time they wanted her to come when called. "Keep him safe," she said, "and I will not go back to them." It was the first time in her life she had refused the cage, rather than stepping quietly back inside it and pulling the door to behind her. Catherine looked at her for a long moment across the lamplight, at the girl who had finally asked for something instead of simply bearing it, and gave her word that the boy would be protected. Adrian stood in the corridor outside the door and did not go in. He had heard enough of it through the gap to know she had not bent. He had braced himself for her to break at the boy's name. It was what the family had wagered everything on, that she would break, and she had not broken. She does not have to go back, he thought, and was caught off guard by how much that single thought loosened in his chest. Down the dark hall, the air of the palace lay clean and settled and still, the way it always lay now, wherever she happened to be. And far off, in a house going damp and dark one room at a time, a family sat waiting on a daughter who was not coming home, still certain that this was a small private matter and that they held every card in it. They were wrong about that, and the wrongness was already loose. The court had begun to look at them and to see. The rot had its hands in their walls, and the truth was out in the open air where no seal could draw it back. And the only thing still missing now was the day someone stood the family up and made them answer for the whole of it. That day was coming. It simply was not this one. The report came at night, plainly sealed, no crest pressed into the wax, nothing on it to say how much it held. Catherine read it at her desk by the one lamp. She read the way she did everything, slowly, all the way down, and the further she went, the stiller she got. There was no record that anyone had ever asked to have Eleanor's gift measured. No letter had ever been sent to any school on her behalf. The space where the reason should sit had been left blank, both times, as if the question had never once been worth the ink. The servants had talked. The eldest daughter ran the whole house, one of them said. She was told she had no need to learn her letters, and so she never learned them. There was scolding, and there was worse than scolding, and it was kept always, where a sleeve or a collar would cover it. One witness stopped partway through a sentence and would not finish it. The clerk had marked the blank and moved on. Dr. Hugh's findings sat near the back, set down flat as weather, old marks, the kind that come from the same thing happening for years. The result was on the page. The how of it was not. The record did not need to show the hand to prove the bruise, and the numbers lined up. The cost of Noah's medicine climbed month by month, and the months it climbed fastest were the exact months they sent Eleanor away to work. The terms of that work, read closely, did not read like service. They read like a sale, a price, a fixed span of years, an exchange, with with a child on one side of it. Catherine's knuckles had gone white on the paper before she noticed she was gripping it. No single line of law, perhaps, had been broken, but laid end to end, the whole of it had a shape, and she had a name for the shape, and the name was not daughter. She carried it to Adrian's study herself. He read without a word, the way she had, and when he set it down, he named the thing she had already seen, that the cruelty had not just happened in that house, it had been allowed, signed off in silence year after year, and that the sick boy had been kept close on purpose, a hand on a leash, so the daughter could always be pulled back. This is no longer one household's problem, he said. She agreed. It would be treated as an incident, not a private family matter to be settled quietly behind a noble name, but a thing the crown put its own hand on. When the demand came, and it came, House Vance asking for their eldest back under the terms of the old arrangement, the inquiry into it was already half written. It found no flaw in how Eleanor had been placed, and no lawful ground on which the family could call her home. Catherine pressed her seal to the refusal and ruled, in plain words, that any further demand of the kind would meet the same answer. She was not doing it to punish them. She said as much, quietly, to the empty room after Adrian had gone. That punishment was a thing they could be made to answer for later. What she wanted now was simpler. She meant to hand back the one thing they had spent 18 years taking, the choices, all of them. And so, without Eleanor knowing it yet, the crown set itself down in the doorway between her and the people who had owned her and did not move. Catherine called her to the small private room, the one with a desk and 2 chairs and no official weight to it, and waited until the door was shut. Word had come from House Vance, she said. They wanted Eleanor to return. To return, you mean? It was not really a question. Eleanor had been waiting for it the way you wait for a cough you can feel coming. You may choose to stay here instead. For a moment, the words did not fit anywhere. Eleanor stood with her hands folded and turned them over inside herself and found no place shaped to hold them. Choose. She had been told where to go and what to do for as long as she had been able to walk. No one had ever set the thing down in front of her and stepped back from it. Catherine had already gone back to her papers, giving her the room. You need not answer now, she added, not looking up. This is not an order. Eleanor bowed and let herself out. Back at her work, the words would not leave her be. Her hands knew the tasks without her, the laundry, the folding, the tools set straight in their places. And underneath the motion, the sentence kept turning over. You may choose to stay. She wrung out a cloth and a single drop hung and fell, and in the small sound of it, she thought of home. Not the house, the back room of it. Noah under the thin blanket, the fever that came at night, the cough that went on too long, the medicine that always cost more than they had. If she was there, the house ran. If she was there, the boy suffered a little less. That had been the whole arithmetic of her life. To choose to stay was to choose not to go back. The two were one coin, and she could not pick up one face of it without the other turning down. And the underside felt like a sin she had no right to commit. Her breath went shallow. She made herself stop thinking and let her hands carry her, the way they always had. She could not decide. She did not yet have the nerve to sit in the seat that had been set for her. But somewhere in the reflex that had run her whole life, hands first, self last, a small crack had finally opened. Catherine caught her in a corridor a few days on, light and unhurried, as if the question had only just occurred to her. Did Eleanor know exactly what her wages came to? After what I need to live, Eleanor said, a little remains. You could support Noah on your own now, entirely. The idea landed somewhere Eleanor had never built a room for. Support him, take him in, keep him, with her own hands and her own coin, somewhere that was not that house. She had spent her whole life counting what there was not enough of. Not enough medicine, not enough money, never enough hours. And here was Catherine telling her, plainly, that now there was enough. I am not urging you toward anything, Catherine said. I am only telling you that you are in a position to choose. And she walked on and left her there. Eleanor did not move for a long while. The floor under her was clean. She had cleaned it. The whole world had just tilted a few degrees on its frame, and she stood still inside it and let it. She was standing in a corridor again, days later, when Adrian found her, stopped dead with a cloth in one hand and nowhere she was walking to. Stopped again, he observed. He did not make it unkind. She started to apologize. He told her there was no need. He had told her that before. Nothing was broken, he pointed out. She was only standing still, and standing still did not break anything. Today your face is different, he said. I have a little more to think about now, she admitted. He asked without weight whether she had decided. Not yet, she told him. He nodded, as if that were the sensible answer. He was bad at choosing himself, he said, so he had made a habit of taking his time, because a choice made in a hurry was a choice you spent a long while regretting. There was that much room here, he added. She could stand still until her answer came. Then he walked off without looking back. He did not press, did not wait to see what his words did, but they did something. For the first time, the long, quiet hallway did not feel like a place she stood in alone. When the answer came, it came without ceremony. Catherine had called her back to the private room to tell her the rest, that the family's demand had been formally refused, that her ties to them were severed in the Crown's own ledger, that she had no obligation now to return to anyone. Eleanor heard it out. Then she said the thing she had been carrying up out of herself for days. Then it is truly all right if I don't go back. Not a question this time either, a floor she was testing her weight on. It is, Catherine said. Stay, and if you want him, bring Noah here. There is a way to do it, and you can afford the doing. She let that sit, then added, there was no need to hurry. She would wait as long as the waiting took. Eleanor chose. She said it plainly, out loud, in a room with a witness, the way a thing becomes real only once it is spoken aloud. She would not go back. She would stay, and she would bring her brother to her, and with the boy under her own roof, the family would have nothing of hers left to hold. The one rope they could always pull her back by went slack in that moment, though they did not yet know it. Catherine only nodded, as if she had known all along, and told her that today she might simply stay as she was. The arrangements, a sick boy moved out of a failing house and into the care of a sister who could finally keep him, began the next morning, quietly, through the Crown. He came 3 days later, in a plain Crown carriage, and Eleanor was waiting in the courtyard before it had fully stopped. Noah climbed down small and slow, blinking up at the size of everything. One hand knotted in the blanket they had wrapped him in for the road. He was thinner than the picture of him she carried. For a moment, he only stared at her, as if he were not sure the palace and the sister standing in it were things he was allowed to have. Then he said her name, Big Sister, in the same small voice from the back room, and the months between them closed. Dr. Hugh had come out to meet the carriage. He looked the boy over there in the daylight, unhurried, and told Eleanor the fever was old and manageable, that rest and steady medicine would do most of the work now. He said it the way he set everything down, as fact, nothing dressed up. She had read his name once, on a page, under findings about old marks. She found she trusted the same flatness now that it was working for them and not against them. The air in the courtyard was clean and settled, the way every room she kept somehow came to be. Noah breathed it in, and by slow degrees seemed to stop bracing. That night, she brought him to the room that was hers, bigger now, made over to hold two, and put him to bed in it. He lay looking at the ceiling for a while, taking the measure of a roof that did not belong to House Vance. The blanket was thick. The lamp stayed lit as long as he wanted it lit. No one came to the door to take anything from him, or to tell him he was a cost. Big Sister, he said into the quiet, is this a place I can come back to? She understood the question under the question. He had never had a place that stayed. Neither had she. Every room either of them had lived in had belonged to someone who could put them out of it whenever it suited. She sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed the blanket flat the way their mother once had, years ago, before any of it. Yes, she said, come back to it as many times as you like. It will be here. So will I. It was the first home either of them had ever chosen. She sat with him until his breathing went slow and even, and the fever flush eased out of his face. And for one whole evening, she let herself want nothing more than this and have it. Then word reached her, late, from the people who had brought him out. Noah had always talked about a heaviness in the old house, a thickness in the air that sat on the chest and would not lift. Eleanor had thought, on the rare nights she let herself think of it at all, that it lived in those walls and would stay shut inside them. It was not staying inside them. The men who had emptied the back room said the weight had followed them to the gate and out past it. It was on the road now. It was past the walls. The heaviness that had filled the house she left was no longer keeping to the house, and somewhere out beyond it, in the dark she could not yet see into, it had begun to spread. She turned the lamp down, not to sleep, not to think, only to close the day. And in the closing she held, very lightly, the new shape of her life. A brother safe under her own roof, a family that could no longer call her home. And underneath it, faint as a draft under a shut door, the cold understanding that whatever had eaten that house was not finished and was no longer only theirs. The dispatches came in faster than any bad season could explain. Eleanor sorted them at the side table while Catherine worked. Field reports from the outlying provinces of Aldermere, dozens of them, and they all said the same thing in different hands. Grain souring in the field for no reason. Wells turning foul. A heavy air settling over villages that no drying and no open window would lift. Between tasks, Catherine had set a board and a few scraps of used paper in front of her and shown her a single shape. "These are letters," the princess said, and nothing more. Eleanor fixed it in her memory in one sitting, the way she fixed everything, and went back to the reports. It was the reports that held her. The heavy air, she knew that air. She had cleared it from a dead room once, from chambers no one had lived in for years. The same wrongness. Only now it was loose in open country, in places she had never been. "Read them back to me," Catherine said, and read the full roll of stricken towns and wells and roads aloud in one pass. Dozens of names, meaning only to have them filed. Eleanor wrote them all back without a miss. Then, unasked, she set them in a different order, not by name, but by where they lay, and by the day each one had first gone wrong. The shape it made stopped them both. The wrongness was not landing at random. It was moving, town to town, well to well, along the roads and the water, outward from somewhere, and faster each week. Agnes came in on other business, glanced at the ordered sheet, and said only, "It depends on what you give her to do." Then she was gone again. Catherine studied the sheet a long moment. "You see it too then," she said quietly. "It is moving." Within the week, it crossed into Ashford itself. It started in the lower wards of the capital, wells gone foul, that same heavy air pressing down over the streets. The city sent its cleaners. They scrubbed, they laid down lime, they burned incense in the doorways. None of it touched the heaviness. It sat where it was and thickened. Agnes saw what the city could not do, and then she saw what Eleanor could. She had stopped to watch the girl work a corridor, the quiet, presence-erasing way she moved. Eleanor reached a patch near the outer wall where the same wrongness had begun to seep in from the city. She paused over it. She cleared it, cleanly, without a word, without once looking up to see if anyone had seen. No one was supposed to have. Agnes had. She did not call out, and she did not praise her. She read the whole of it in one slow look, a child raised to disappear, and the one pair of hands in all of Ashford that could do what the city's cleaners could not, and she kept it behind her face, and resolved to stand close. Catherine sent her to Adrian's office because it was drowning. His rooms had become the heart of the realm's response, and the flood of reports had buried his clerks. Where they lost the thread, Eleanor held the whole of it in her head. Which town, which well, which remedy had already failed, which beds had filled overnight. She moved through the chaos and turned it back into something a person could read. And what it read, as she laid the reports out in order, was worse with every day. The stricken places multiplying, the gaps between them closing, and now a tally that had not been there a month before. The dead. Adrian came to lean on her without thinking, handing her clipped instructions as though she already understood, which she did. When he told her she was a real help, she answered him evenly, that she was a maid, here by the princess's order, and not to overstep it. He let the line stand and went back to work. Then Dr. Hugh, the best healer the crown had, set the worst of it down plainly. A wasting sickness had appeared in the afflicted wards. The heaviness had stopped settling on crops and water and started settling on people. "It does not answer," he said. "I have no name for it, and nothing I do reaches it." Adrian took the report without flinching, but Eleanor saw the line it crossed in him. The trouble had begun taking lives. "Then nothing reaches it," she said. "Nothing at all." She left with a colder thing settled in her chest. If the finest physician in Aldermere was helpless, then she had begun to fear she already knew what this was, and what, in the whole realm, it answered to. Behind the walls, Noah was safe, and slowly getting stronger. Dr. Hugh came to examine him through those days, and the boy steadied under care he had never had. When Noah asked why he had become a healer, Hugh's answer was a plain one, that he had wanted to be someone who truly listened. It lit something in the boy. Noah told Eleanor he wanted to study, to become someone who listened like that too. Adrian had granted him a single book each night from the library, and the two of them read together when the lamps burned low, her first borrowed letters and his trace side by side. It was the one warm hour in the day. Hugh let it finish before he drew Eleanor aside, and then his voice changed. The wards were slipping, he told her, low so the boy would not hear. Beds filling faster than he could empty them, every remedy failing, the heaviness in them thickening by the day, and him with nothing left that reached it. Eleanor heard it and knew. The heaviness, she said. It is the same thing, isn't it? She did not say the rest, that it was the same wrongness she had once lifted by hand in a dead room with no one watching. She held that where she held everything. Then it reached their own gate. A faint heaviness crept into the palace district itself, a wrongness in the night air, a sourness at the outer wells that had not been there a week before. Eleanor felt it the way she felt everything of its kind, long before anyone thought to name it. She kept her own small room clear without thinking, the air inside it clean as still water, while the dark beyond the glass thickened and pressed. She stood at the window late, unable to settle. The thing she had spent her life pretending not to notice was at the threshold of the one place she had ever been safe. No walls would hold it out. She understood that plainly, the way she understood the reports. And she understood the colder thing under it too, that she would not be able to stay hidden much longer. Then an entire ward fell in a single night. The wells in it ran black. The air sickened anyone who breathed it. Healers, cleaners, and priests were driven back with nothing to show. By morning, Dr. Hugh had lost the whole ward. I have nothing left to try, he told the assembled court. So the crown gave the thing a name. All of it. The soured crops, the fouled wells, the wasting sickness, the heavy air crawling province to province was one corruption, advancing, and they named it so the court would stop pretending it was weather. They called it the rot, not spoilage, not a hard season. A single spreading thing that fire and medicine and prayer and water had all failed to touch. For the first time, in front of the whole court, the realm admitted out loud that it had no answer. Fear moved through the hall like a draft under a door. If fire and prayer and the crown's own physicians were spent, then nothing stood between the rot and the rest of Aldermere but distance. And the rot was eating the distance, week by week, ward by ward, exactly as the map drawn in a maid's hand had said it would. In private, Catherine and Adrian came at last to the one thing they had left unspoken. Every avenue was spent but one, a hand they had buried themselves. We are out of everything but her, Catherine said. Adrian did not argue it. Then we ask her. Tonight, we do not command her. They put it to her that night, and they put it as an asking. Catherine told her plainly what the rot was, that the heaviness now taking the city was the same wrongness Eleanor had once lifted from a dead room. The realm had nothing left. She could refuse, Catherine said. The weight of the decision was theirs to carry, not hers. Whatever this brings, Adrian said. I stand for it. Eleanor had spent her whole life making herself into a sound no one noticed. To say yes was to be seen, by a watching court, by the whole realm, as the very thing she had been taught never to show. Everything in her was built to refuse it, to keep her head down, to let the moment pass to someone louder, to be the brush and never the hand that anyone watched holding it. She stepped forward anyway. If no one else can, she said, then I will try. They brought her quietly to the fallen ward, where the healers had given up, and the air itself was poison. She felt it before she reached it, the heaviness she knew, grown past any room she had ever cleared, thick enough now to taste, pressing on the chest of everyone who came near. The watchers held back, Catherine, Adrian, Agnes, Dr. Hugh, a knot of stricken officials who had come to see. The sick lay where they had fallen, too weak to lift their heads. At the center of the ward, a well stood brimming with water gone black. Stand back, Eleanor said. Let me reach it. She knelt and laid her hands flat to the corruption. For a moment, nothing. Then a light answered her, not a blaze, nothing loud, a clean pale light that rose from under her palms the way clear water rises through silt. Where it touched, the black drew back. It went out from her hands in a slow widening ring, and the heaviness peeled away ahead of it like a held breath finally let go. The air changed first. The thing that had sat on every chest in the ward thinned and lifted and was simply gone, and people who had not drawn a full breath in days hauled the clean air in and wept at the taste of it. The black sank out of the well and left the water clear to the bottom. Color crept back into the faces of the sick. The walls stopped sweating that wrong damp. It took time, and no one spoke through it. The pale glow ran out along the gutters and climbed the sweating stone, and one by one, the lanterns the watchers carried seemed the dimmer light in that street. Where the clean light passed, the rot did not fight and did not flee so much as let go. A thing that had held the whole quarter in its fist, simply opening its fingers, finger by finger. Somewhere deep in the ward, a child began to cry. An ordinary, healthy, furious crying. the first such sound the quarter had made in days. And still the light spread from her, room to room, street to street, until the whole stricken quarter came quietly back to itself. She did not strain. That was the thing the watchers could not look away from. There was no force in it, no thunder, only a girl on her knees with her hands to the ground, and a corruption that fire and medicine and prayer could not touch, receding from her as though it could not bear to be near what she was. This was not a maid with a knack for clean floors. This was the one purity in the realm the rot could not stand against. I could not touch it, Dr. Hughes said, barely above a breath. She is touching it. Agnes did not look the least bit surprised. I knew there was more to you, she said. Then a brush and a rag. Catherine watched the black recede and said it half to herself. It is answering her. The cleansing answered the city. Eleanor's own map answered the last question. They had it from her hand. The ordered sheet that set every stricken place by where it lay and when it first turned. The crown's people walked the rot backward along its advancing front, town to town, well to well, toward the single point it had all spread out from. The trail did not stop in some far province. It ran back and came to rest on one house, House Vance, the house Eleanor had scrubbed for years. For as long as she had lived there, clearing its rooms by reflex every day of her life, her quiet hands had been holding the rot at bay, without anyone knowing there was anything there to hold. She had been the shield. The day they sent her away, the shield came down, and the thing she had unknowingly kept penned slipped its walls and went out into the world. The shield was her, Adrian said, low. As long as she was there, it never spread. Agnes's voice came harder. They threw away the one thing keeping their house standing. Eleanor stood over the map and understood it all at once, that the home which had used her and thrown her out was the very place she had been protecting, every day, for years. Then it began, she said, where I used to scrub the floors. There was no bitterness in it. She said it the way she said everything, quietly and exactly, but the cold of it settled and stayed. She thought of the floors she had scrubbed on her knees in that house while they told her she was nothing it needed. The house had been standing on her the whole time and never once known it, and neither had she. The rot was loose on the kingdom now, and only one pair of hands in the realm could answer it. The court knew at last what she was, and the trail to its beginning ran straight back through the gate of the house that had thrown her away, the family she had been shielding without knowing it, who would, before very long, have their own bitter reason to come looking for the girl they had discarded. The house that had thrown Eleanor away was dying, and no one inside it could say why. It started in the lower rooms. A sourness rose in the air that no open window cleared, and a damp crept up the walls and stayed. The cooks scrubbed it, burned incense over it, carried in lime against it, and the heaviness only thickened. By the second week, the wells at the edge of the grounds had gone black, and the grain in the stores had soured in its sacks. The servants left first. They did not give notice. They simply stopped coming back, one and then a handful, and then most of them, until the long halls stood empty, and the few who stayed pressed their hands to their chests against air that hung on them like a weight. For years that manor had never once soured. The floors had come up clean under one pair of hands. The air had stayed sweet in rooms nobody bothered to think about, and the family that lived there had called the girl who did it worthless, and never once wondered why their house, alone of all the houses now failing across the kingdom, had stayed whole. The day they sent her away, the thing she had been holding back without knowing it slipped its leash. The rot had a doorway now, and the doorway was the house that had made it. It festered out of the cellars and into the gardens, and from the gardens into the fields beyond the wall, until the land around House Vance was the sickest ground in the realm. They tried everything a noble house could buy. They paid for priests who prayed over the foul rooms and left coughing. They paid for physicians who could name nothing and cure less. They sealed the worst wings and moved deeper into the house, and the heaviness followed them deeper, room by room, as if the manor itself were closing around them. Nothing they owned and nothing they could purchase touched it. For the first time in their lives, the family found a problem that money and blood could not order away, and the family that had spent her for years now stood at the dead center of the very thing the whole kingdom most feared. Eleanor heard about it in a corridor, the way servants hear everything. She was carrying a stack of documents to Catherine's office when two maids ahead of her slowed to trade gossip. The first was about the prince. The council had named his marriage candidates. They whispered, flawless girls of perfect blood, and the timing was no accident. A low-born maid had been climbing too far, too fast, and a royal wedding was a tidy wall to put back in front of her. Eleanor did not change her pace. She did not change her face, but something cold settled in her chest and would not be named, and she let it stay there, unnamed, and kept walking. The maids moved on to fresher news. House Vance was falling apart, they said. The whole manor had gone foul. The staff had fled, and nothing the family tried would lift it. That one, she recognized. The heaviness they described, the air that no cleaning could reach. It was the same wrongness she had quietly cleared out of that house every single day for years with the gift she had been forbidden to show. She had wiped it from the corners of rooms nobody thanked her for. She had kept it out of the nursery while a feverish boy slept, and out of the kitchens, and out of the very floors the family walked across without ever once looking down. They had never known the air was clean because of her. They had only known the girl who scrubbed it was beneath their notice. And now she was gone, and the house was rotting, and the two facts fit together so neatly that she did not even have to reach for the meaning. It arrived on its own, cold and exact. She set the documents on Catherine's desk and took her place behind her working mistress, composed as ever. The princess glanced up, read something in her stillness, and chose not to ask. That night, after she closed a book with Noah and lay alone in the dark, Eleanor told herself the marriage had always been coming and that it changed nothing about her work. Her worth did not rest on her birth anymore, or on being anyone's choice. She closed her eyes and set both the house and the wedding aside. Days later, in that same office, Catherine set down her pen to hear two reports. The first came from an aide. The negotiations with House Ellsworth were moving smoothly, he said. The Marcus house that could give Eleanor a standing, the court could not wave away. Catherine asked whether they were rushing it. They were leaving room on purpose, he answered, and Ellsworth understood why. Then she asked after House Vance, and Agnes stepped forward. The matter was fully secured, the head maid reported. The family had no leverage left to use, now or later. Every avenue closed, and the manor itself was collapsing. The heaviness had festered through the halls unchecked, the servants had fled, and the estate was rotting from the inside out. Their name was breaking in public as the ruin spread, and the old record of how they had treated Eleanor, the withheld medicine, the years of unpaid servitude, had begun to surface where everyone could see it. Catherine nodded and did not press for more. She had spent months clearing this path, isolating the family until they had no room to stand. But the path was all she would prepare. The judgment at the end of it was not hers to pass. A house with no room left, and a manor full of rot, she thought, was a house that would soon have nowhere to go but to the daughter it had thrown away. They came crawling in the end. Margaret, Edmund, and Vanessa arrived in the capital with their manor rotting behind them and their name in ruins, and they sought out Eleanor because only her hallowed light could cleanse the thing eating their house and their lands alive. There was nowhere else for them to go, so the three of them knelt in the great hall in full view of the court that had spent years looking straight through the girl they were now begging. It was not an apology. Eleanor understood that at once. Margaret's voice, when it came, was her old commands curdled into pleading. The woman who had never once spoken to her without contempt now reached for soft words and could not quite find them. And what came out instead was a demand wearing the shape of a prayer. She begged for the gift she had always despised, and never once for forgiveness. Edmund pressed a father's claim, blood and duty, the words of a man who wanted to be saved without being made to answer for a single thing he had allowed. He could not meet his daughter's eyes even now. He looked at the floor and talked about family. Vanessa knelt a pace behind them, and her contempt had cracked clean through, and underneath it was only fear. The fear of a girl who had lorded a stolen standing over her stepsister for years and felt it crumbling out from under her at last. Their pleas were not remorse. They were need, raw and stripped of every advantage they had ever held over her. The same self-interest that had driven them from the start, now with nothing left to dress it in. The court watched it happen. The same officials who had once let their eyes slide past a House Vance maid as though she were a piece of the furniture now stood riveted while that maid's family groveled at her feet. And as they begged, the record came into the light with them. The medicine they had held hostage over a sick boy to keep his sister obedient. The years of work they had taken from her and never paid. It was read where everyone could hear, and their name finished its collapse right there on the polished stone. I had stood in my own great hall once and held a child's medicine in my hand like a leash, and I had been certain the small worthless girl scrubbing my floors would scrub them until she died. I had thrown her out the gate to save the cost of feeding 2 mouths, and now my house was black with rot, and my name was Ash, and the only hands in the realm that could save me were hers. And I was on my knees in front of the whole court, begging the child I had discarded. And somewhere under the fear, I understood, finally and completely, exactly what I had thrown away. Eleanor stood above them and felt the cold of it settle, clean and quiet. There was no rush of triumph in it, no heat. She had imagined this moment more times than she would ever admit in the years she spent on her knees with a brush, and now that it had come, she found she did not need to do anything with it at all. The people who had measured out a sick child's medicine to keep her obedient were on the floor in front of the whole court, asking her for their lives. That was already the whole of it. So she did not gloat. She did not lift them up, and she did not strike them down. She let the consequences they had earned arrive and stand in the open where everyone could see them, and she refused, simply, totally, to be commanded by them ever again. Whatever was to be done with them was a thing she had not yet decided, and she would not be hurried into it by their fear any more than she had been hurried by their cruelty. She let them kneel. She did not answer. The court had tried another way to put her back in her place, and it was failing too. It had started at the council. A faction of elders had raised Adrian's marriage as the final order of business, candidates of perfect lineage, the match framed as settled, his agreement assumed. Adrian had heard the timing for exactly what it was. The wedding was being pushed now, precisely because a discarded servant's proven worth had begun to make birth look cheap, and his marriage was meant to be the wall. An elderly retainer had brought the formal proposal to his desk soon after, flawless in every line. He had read it, felt no pull in it at all, and set it at the very edge of the desk, not signed, not torn up. Refused without a word. Then Catherine came to dismantle the lever for good. She arrived under the cover of teasing him about a rare slip her flawless maid had made, and his silence told her everything she needed to know. So she laid Eleanor's own record on the desk, right beside the faction's proposal, a baron's eldest daughter. Hallowed light purity measured as exceptional on the books. Rare competence, healthy, with a younger brother in her care, and lately studying languages and statecraft toward a standing the court could not dismiss. Bloodline on that side, Catherine said, tapping the proposal. She slid the record an inch closer. And everything she has actually proven on this one. Tell me which one is the cheap argument. Adrian did not answer, because there was no honest answer that helped the faction. What the elders were truly trying to cage, he knew, was something smaller and far more dangerous to their order. A boy named Noah had chased him down a corridor, only to thank him, plainly expecting nothing, for a place where he could eat well and sleep without fear, and had said he wanted to stay forever. The same boy had later asked, with a child's bluntness, what the prince thought of his sister, and Adrian had heard himself admit she was important to him. There had been a midday meal, the 4 of them at one table, a servant and her brother seated among royalty, as though the old rules had never existed. That was the thing the marriage was aimed at. That was what they wanted to wall off. Catherine watched her brother's silence and was satisfied. The bloodline lever had lost its grip. She changed the subject and let it lie. Adrian found Eleanor that evening and said the thing aloud at last. He would not stand idle behind his position, he told her. He would not let his marriage be made into a weapon to put her back beneath her birth, and he would not do nothing while they tried. But he would not rush her either. The choice was hers. He would wait for it, and that was enough. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. She had built her whole life around taking up no space, around being a sound nobody noticed, the scrape of a brush, a door that never stuck, a room that smelled of nothing at all. For 18 years, the safest thing she could be was invisible. Now a prince was standing in front of her, handing her a choice and waiting on it, as if her answer were the only thing in the room that mattered. The old instinct told her to make herself small and let the decision be made for her, the way it always had been. She did not. I will not run, she said. That was all. It was enough. Adrian understood that they were looking now in the same direction, and the last lever the court had, the one that tried to make her own heart the thing that caged her, failed completely. Catherine heard the report of it that same night. She let out a long breath, the satisfied sound of a woman who had finally cleared the last of the way and gave the word to proceed. Beside her, Agnes asked carefully whether this was truly all right. Catherine only repeated it. Proceed. But proceeding was not finishing. The family still knelt somewhere in the capital, ruined and waiting, and Eleanor had not yet decided their fate. The rot still spread across the kingdom, blacker every day, and the only pair of hands that could answer it had not yet been asked to answer it at full scale. The court that had judged her by blood now waited on what she would prove she was. The wall they built had not held, the leverage was gone, and the path in front of her ran straight and open at last, straight toward the people who had broken her, and straight toward the thing devouring the realm. She had not faced either yet. She only stood, level and unhurried, and let the way come clear. It started the way it always started, with a smell. By the time anyone in the lower districts of Ashford thought to call it by a name, the wells had already gone black. The water came up dark and oily, and would not pour clean no matter how long it ran. Bread soured between the morning and the noon. The air thickened until it sat in the lungs like wet wool, and people who had walked to market in the morning could not walk home by dusk. The healers came first, and the healers failed. They burned the old herbs that broke a fever, and the fever did not break. They scrubbed the cobbles with lye, and the stones sweated the foulness straight back up through the cracks. They sealed the worst houses, and the heaviness simply climbed the next street over, patient and certain, the way a tide comes in. Then the priests came, and the priests failed too. The gray crept uphill. That was the thing no one could stop talking about, that it moved like something with a will, leaving the gutters and the poor lanes behind and climbing, ward by ward, toward the bright districts and the palace on its hill. Families who had money packed it onto carts and found the gates clogged with everyone else who had money. The carts did not move. The gray did. It was the same thing. Eleanor would have known it blind, from across the city, with her eyes shut and her back turned. It was the same heaviness she had wiped off the floors of a cold manor every morning of her childhood, the same wrongness she had pulled out of the air of that house for 18 years without anyone ever once knowing she was doing it. She had held it back at one house with 2 hands and a rag and her silence. Now it had a whole city to feed on, and there was no one quietly holding it back at all. The bells in the lower wards stopped ringing. There was no one left well enough to ring them. Up in the palace, the council had run out of things to try. Eleanor stood at the edge of the great hall in her pale attendant's uniform and listened to grave men in fine dress say the same hopeless thing in turn. The ministers had spent the morning naming remedies, and the crown had spent it striking them off one by one as word came back from the city that each had failed. The court that had once looked straight through her now stood very still, and the fear in the room had a weight to it that everyone could feel and no one would say. She did not need them to say it. She had felt the wrongness pressing in through the palace stone since before the first messenger arrived. One by one, the ministers stopped talking, and one by one, without quite meaning to, they turned and looked at her. She had known they would. From the day the rot first took a single ward of this city, and she had walked into it, and walked out with the air clean behind her, she had been the realm's one answer, and everyone in this hall knew it. They had just needed to exhaust every answer that did not require them to put their lives in the hands of a woman who, a year ago, would not have been permitted through the servants' door. Catherine crossed the hall to her, ignoring the watching court entirely, and stopped close. "You feel it," Catherine said. Not a question. Since this morning, Eleanor kept her voice low. "It is the same thing, only there is so much more of it." For the first time in a long time, she was not certain. She had cleansed a room. She had cleansed a ward, with the whole quarter gone gray around her, and she had walked out of it on her own feet. But a ward was a ward. This was a kingdom's capital. Every street of it, the wells and the sick and the very air. And somewhere underneath her steadiness sat a cold, small voice, asking whether there was a ceiling to what she could do, and whether she was about to find it with a city watching. She thought then of her mother. She had dreamed of her the night before, the cold hallway of the old manor, her brother burning with fever, and the one time the child she had been had reached out a glowing hand to ease his pain. Her mother had caught her wrist, not here. For years, Eleanor had carried that as a wound, proof the gift was something shameful to be hidden. In the dream, she had finally understood it for what it was. Her mother had not been afraid of the gift. She had been afraid of what people did to a girl who had one, how they priced her, used her, passed her hand from buyer to buyer until nothing of the girl was left. The hiding had never been shame. It had been a shield held over her daughter's whole childhood, and Eleanor had woken calm, with the shield no longer needed, because she had decided she was done hiding. "I will not promise you it can be held," she said to Catherine, I have never tried to hold this much. Catherine looked at her for a moment. Then we make sure, she said, that when you try, nothing in this kingdom can say you had no right to. They took her to a quiet room first, away from the council and its fear. Wallace and Vivian of House Ellsworth were waiting there, the Marquis and his wife, the house that stood closest to the crown. Noah was already with them, small in a deep chair by the fire, and the moment Eleanor came in, he straightened with relief, the way he always did when she walked into a room. Wallace did not waste her time with comfort. He told her plainly what the room was for. A woman without a house behind her could not do what the realm was about to ask her to do. She could cleanse a city and still be called a servant the next morning, and the nobles who had spent a year trying to wall her down would call it so the moment it was over. He would not let the realm be saved by a maid it refused to let stand. So he and Vivian had a thing to offer her, not a courtesy, not a reward, but a place. They wished to take her in, to make her, on the public record and in the family heart both, a daughter of their house. Eleanor heard the word daughter and felt something go very still in her chest. She had spent her whole life being measured for what she was worth to other people. The worth her own family had buried, called useless, called a burden, sent away, was about to be set down on the realm's own record in ink that could not be argued with. She found, to her own embarrassment, that she could not answer at once. Vivian crossed to her and took her hands, chapped and rough as they still were, and did not so much as glance at them. I do not want an arrangement, Vivian said gently. I want a daughter, if you will let me be foolish enough to ask for one. There is no hurry. Grow used to us slowly. I will be glad of it either way. It was Noah who broke the silence. He looked up from his chair, straight at Vivian, with the awful directness only a child has left in him. Will you really be my mother? Vivian turned to him and answered without a heartbeat's pause. I will. The boy went quiet. Eleanor watched him weigh it. Her brother, who had learned young that grown-ups made promises and grown-ups broke them, and then she watched him give one small, firm nod, the way he nodded when he had decided a thing was true. There were no judging eyes in this room, no appraisal, no price, no condition waiting underneath the kindness. For the first time in her life, there were adults choosing to stand behind her, and her brother, asking nothing back, and the guard she had held up since she was a girl simply could not find anything to brace against. Her eyes stung. She let them. Then yes, she said. It was all she trusted herself to say. The papers were drawn and witnessed and made public before the evening was out. When Eleanor walked into the formal hall, she walked in as Eleanor Ellsworth. She wore a fine pale gown that still did not feel like hers, and she carried herself the way she had taught herself to read a room. At the edge, posture straight, taking in every current before she moved into it. The old servant's eye had not left her. It had only changed arenas. A nobleman she did not know crossed to greet her, polite and testing, remarking that he did not believe he knew her face. She gave him her name, Eleanor Ellsworth. The Marquis' house name moved through the hall like a stone dropped in still water. She watched it happen, the small turn of heads, the murmurs starting at the near edge and rippling out, the reassessment passing over face after face as people who had been ready to look past a stranger suddenly remembered they had business standing closer to a daughter of House Ellsworth. The objection they had sharpened for a year, that a commoner could not rise, that birth was birth. It died right there in the room, with nothing for it to cut. But underneath the murmur ran a colder current, and she felt the moment the two met. Word was moving through the same crowd that the rot had climbed past the lower districts now, that it was in the bright wards, that it would reach the Palace Hill by morning. And as that word spread, the looks she drew changed again, from curiosity to calculation to something closer to a drowning man's hope. They were not reassessing a newcomer anymore. They were looking at the only door left in a burning house. Adrian found her in the middle of it. He came through the crowd without hurry, touched her arm, and said her name, just her name, in front of all of them, which from a prince in a watching court said more than a speech would have. He drew her a step aside. She understood, walking beside him, that she was not being sheltered. A year ago, a man like him, standing near a woman like her, would have been protection, a shield held up over someone small. This was not that. This was two people walking into the same storm side by side, and his choice in the matter had been made a long time ago and did not need saying tonight. I will not run, she told him quietly. She had told him so once already, and she found she meant it more now than she had then. By full dark, the rot reached the palace itself. They felt it come up the hill, the same heaviness that had taken the city block by block, now climbing the last slope. The air on the high terrace going thick and wrong, the lamps guttering as if even the flames could not breathe it. From the terrace, the whole of Ashford lay spread out below, and where there should have been 1,000 warm windows, there was a low, sick gray, glowing faintly in the dark, swallowing street after street. The cold of it reached the terrace before the gray did. It came up the hill as a smell first, then as a weight. The same wet wool thickness that had sat on the lower wards, now pressing against the palace stone, guttering the lamps along the rail one by one, until half the terrace stood in the dark. Behind her, she heard the court go quiet in a new way. Not the quiet of waiting, but the quiet of people who had just understood, finally and completely, that there was nothing between them and the thing climbing the hill except one woman. The court came out onto the terrace behind her, the ministers, the nobles, Catherine and Wallace and Vivian, Adrian at her shoulder, and behind them, the whole watching weight of a city that had run out of every other answer. No one spoke. There was nothing left to try, and everyone knew it. There was only her. Eleanor walked to the edge of the terrace alone and looked down at the dying city. This was the moment her mother had spent a childhood keeping her from. The moment she stood where everyone could see exactly what she was and could never again pretend she was a girl nobody needed to notice. Every small trick of being invisible she had ever learned, she was about to throw away in front of the entire realm. The cold, small voice asked her again whether there was a ceiling and whether she would find it tonight. She breathed in the foul air, all the way to the bottom of her lungs, and decided she did not care. She had hidden this her whole life. She was finished hiding it. Eleanor raised her hands. The light came up out of her like a held breath finally let go. It began small, a pale, clean glow gathering at her open palms. The same light she had once laid against the floor of a sick room. The same light she had spread through one fallen ward on her knees. But she did not keep it small this time. She fed it. She opened her hands wider and let it climb, and it climbed brighter and brighter until it was not a glow at her palms anymore, but a column of clean white light standing up off the terrace into the black sky, lighting the bruised clouds from beneath, throwing her shadow long across the stone and the staring court. It was not force. That was the thing the watching nobles would never quite be able to explain afterward. There was no blast, no fire, nothing struck down. It was the opposite of force. It was purity, a clean so total that the foulness simply could not exist in the same air as it, the way the dark cannot stay in a room when the shutters are thrown open. She did not reach for anything new to do it. That was the secret no one on the terrace could have guessed. She did only what she had done every morning of her life. The same small motion she had used to take the wrongness out of one cold room. The same she had used on one fallen ward. She simply did not stop at the wall. She had always stopped at the wall, at the edge of the room, at the edge of what one quiet girl was allowed to touch. Tonight she let it run past the wall and kept letting it, the room becoming a street, the street becoming a ward, the ward becoming a city. And she found the gift did not care how far she sent it. It only needed her to stop being afraid of how far. The light reached the edge of the terrace and poured down the hill. It went the way the rot had come, only faster and backward. Where it touched the bright wards, the gray thinned and lifted and was gone, and the windows that had been swallowed came back one by one, warm and ordinary, as if a hand were wiping a fogged glass clean from the inside. It poured into the streets she had stood in that morning. It ran down into the lower districts where the bells had stopped, and as it passed over them, the black wells ran clear, and the spoiled grain in the carts went sweet again, and the air that had sat in people's lungs like wet wool simply lifted away, and the dying sat up. All across the city, in sealed houses and choked lanes, and the dark wards where the healers had given up, people who had been too drained to lift their heads felt the weight come off their chests and breathed, truly breathed, for the first time in days. Color came back into gray faces. Children who had gone quiet began to cry again, which was the most beautiful sound the city had heard in a week. At the jammed gates, where the carts had sat nose to tail since morning, the people who had been clawing to get out stopped and turned and looked back up the hill at the light and forgot the carts entirely. In the sealed sick houses, the doors were thrown open from the inside. An old woman in the river ward, who had lain down that afternoon, certain she would not rise again, walked out into her lane on her own feet, just to see where the dawn was coming from in the middle of the night. The light went on, ward by ward, street by street, all the way to the river and the far walls, until there was not a corner of Ashford the clean had not reached. On the terrace, Eleanor stood in the center of all of it, arms open, her pale gown lit white to the hem, her face calm and exactly focused, not straining, not breaking, only steady, the way she had always been steady, wiping a floor at dawn. She had been so afraid of a ceiling. She had found none. Holding it was not like lifting a weight. It was like opening a window and standing out of the way of the wind. The longer she kept her hands open, the easier it came, as if the light had been dammed up in her for 18 years behind every time she had been told to keep it down. And now that the wall was gone, it only wanted to run. She had braced for the moment it would cost her something, the moment her knees would go, the moment she would have to choose between the far wards and staying upright. The moment never came. There was simply more of her than there had ever been room to show. The gift that her own family had called worthless, the thing they had buried and priced and thrown away, was pouring out of her at the scale of a kingdom and pulling an entire capital back from the edge of ruin. And every soul who had ever overlooked her was standing right there watching her do it. The court watched. The ministers who had named her a servant that morning watched. The nobles who had spent a year building walls to keep the commoner maid down stood on the terrace with the clean light on their faces and watched the realm be saved by exactly the woman they had tried to wall out. No one spoke. Some of them had stopped being able to. Catherine stood at the terrace rail with her hand pressed to her mouth, watching the maid she had taken under her wing rise into the realm's deliverance. Wallace and Vivian stood close together, grave and proud, their faith in her made undeniable in front of the whole court. Every objection of blood and birth burned clean away by the light coming off the daughter they had just claimed. Adrian crossed the terrace and stopped at her side, in full view of all of them, and said her name once. She did not turn. She kept her hands open and her eyes on the city, but something in her shoulders eased to know he was there. Slowly, over long minutes, the longest and brightest the city had ever known, the gray gave out. The last of it thinned at the far edges of Ashford and was gone, and there was nothing left for the light to clean. Eleanor lowered her hands, and the column of white sank back into a glow, and the glow sank back into nothing, and the night was only a night again, clear and ordinary and full of warm windows. For a moment, there was no sound at all. Then, from the city below, the bells began to ring. First one, somewhere in the lower wards, by someone well enough now to climb a tower and pull a rope. Then another, then a dozen, then every bell in Ashford, ringing up the hill into the dark. The rot was broken. The realm was saved. And the discarded servant of House Vance stood elevated and witnessed an entirely undeniable on a palace terrace, a daughter of a marquis house, the savior of Aldermere, with the whole court that had erased her, now unable to look anywhere but at her. Every loop the year had opened was closed now, every question answered, every wall down, every question but one. Somewhere in the capital, ruined and waiting, knelt the family that had thrown her away, the ones who had called her useless, priced her brother's medicine like a leash, and sent her out the door. She had cleansed a kingdom in front of the entire realm. She had not yet turned, even once, to face them. She stood in the quiet on the terrace, the bells ringing up from the city she had just saved, and let that last door wait. It would not wait much longer. They were brought in through the wide doors and made to wait in the open center of the hall, where every noble in Aldermere could see them. Margaret came first. Her fine clothes had gone dull from the road, and the hauteur she once wore like armor hung loose on her now. Edmund followed with his shoulders bowed, and Vanessa a pace behind, her eyes darting along the watching gallery and finding no friend in it. House Vance had nowhere left to go. The rot had rooted in their lands first and never let go. The fields had gone gray, the household had scattered, and not one house in the realm would take their hand. So they had come to the capital to beg, not to apologize. There was no apology in any of them. They had come because only hallowed light could save what little they had left, and the woman who carried it had once been theirs to command. The court knew the story by now. Word had run ahead of the family down every corridor that the maid these people had thrown into the yard was the woman who had just cleansed a kingdom, and a daughter of House Ellsworth besides. So the nobles gathered to watch, and the three of them were left standing in the middle of the floor, exposed on every side, with nowhere to put their eyes. It was the same exposure they had once forced on a servant girl who scrubbed where anyone could kick her down. The hall had simply turned its camera around. Catherine stood near the high seat, saying nothing, her gaze level and cold on the three of them. She did not move to comfort anyone, and she did not need to. She was waiting, the way the whole room was waiting. Then a side door opened, and Eleanor came in last. She wore plain clothes. She could have come draped in the pale Ellsworth colors, in every fine thing her new name now allowed her, and she had chosen instead a simple unadorned dress, the kind she had worn on her knees in their house. She crossed to the seat at the head of the hall and took it, and for the first time in her life, she sat above the people who had owned her. The whole hall went still to watch her do it. The family's eyes came up to the high seat and found her there, plainly dressed, perfectly calm, and something flickered across their faces, the first crack of an understanding that had not reached them yet. The girl they had thrown into the yard was the only thing now standing between them and the grave. Margaret's hands worked at the front of her ruined dress. Edmund could not hold the look for more than a breath. Vanessa stared as if she had never once seen this person before, which, in every way that counted, she had not. She did not lower her eyes. She did not make herself small. She looked at the three who had broken her, folded her chapped hands in her lap, and waited. Margaret spoke first, and her plea came out smooth even now. The estate was dying, she said in so many words. Surely a daughter would not stand by and watch her own house rot. Surely blood meant something, even after a quarrel. She asked for the cleansing of the land and the return of the Vance name, and she asked it as though she were owed. Edmund pressed from the other side with the only lever he had ever held. He was her father, he reminded her. Blood still bound her to them, whatever had passed between them, and a child owed a duty to the house that raised her. He said the word duty more than once, as if repeating it might make it weigh something again. Eleanor did not interrupt. She let them empty themselves of every demand in front of the watching court, the exact way she had once been made to empty herself of words in their house. And she heard the shape of it clearly, the leverage running underneath the pleading. It was the same logic they had used on Noah's medicine, doled out by the spoonful to keep her on a string. They were trying to price her again. It did not move her. She noticed something else, distantly, while they begged. She was not shaking. She had walked into this hall braced for the old dread to rise in her throat the moment she saw their faces, and the dread had simply not come. The fear she had carried every day for years was gone, and in its place was room she had never had before. "I have heard you," she said, when Margaret paused for breath. "I will answer when I am ready, and not before." That was all. And in the silence that followed, the family began to come apart on its own, with no hand laid on it. It started with Edmund. Denied the easy yes, he turned on his wife in front of everyone. It was Margaret who had withheld the boy's medicine. Margaret who had driven the children out the door. Margaret's cruelty that had brought the house down on all their heads. Margaret threw it straight back at him. He had watched it all for years and lifted not one finger, and that made him every bit as guilty as her. Their voices climbed, ugly and self-incriminating, each one indicting the other in the hearing of the entire court. Vanessa could only spit her stepsister's name like a curse, and her brother's after it, and the gallery heard exactly what kind of house had raised her. Eleanor watched it happen and felt no triumph. She had imagined this moment for years, pictured herself fierce and glad in it, and the joy she had expected was simply not in her. There was only a clean, level clarity about what she was going to do. She thought of her mother. Elise had given her one rule, drilled into her since she was small enough to fit in a lap: never let them see. For years, Eleanor had carried that rule like a brand, proof there was something shameful in her that had to be kept covered. Now, watching this family tear at each other over a power they had never once bothered to understand, she finally saw the rule for what it had always been. Her mother had not hidden the gift to shame her. She had hidden it to keep it out of hands exactly like these. Hands that would have priced it, leashed it, and called it theirs. The cage Eleanor had hated all her life had been a shield the whole time. And with that, the shape of what she would do settled in her, clean and certain. She would not pay them back in their own coin. She had sworn, somewhere in the worst years, that she would never become the thing that had made her. But she would not hand them the leash again either, dressed up as mercy. Somewhere between those two refusals lay exactly what they deserved, and for the first time, the choosing of it was hers. Catherine crossed to her then and bent close, her voice low enough for Eleanor alone. "I can say it for you, if you would rather not face them. The crown could deliver the judgment in its own name. Eleanor would never have to speak to them with her own mouth at all. It was a real kindness, offered the way only a true friend offers one." Eleanor turned it down without a breath of doubt. "No, if it is going to be said, it will be said by me," because that was the theft hiding under all the others. For years, she had been spoken over, spoken for, decided about, and erased. They had taken her labor and her brother's safety and her mother's gift, and under all of it, they had taken her voice. The one thing she would not hand to anyone else now, not even a friend who loved her, was the saying of it. Catherine held her eyes a moment, then stepped back and dipped her head. "Then the floor is yours." Eleanor rose. She came down from the high seat, crossed the open floor, and stopped close in front of the three of them, close enough that they had to tilt their heads up to meet her. "You will look at me while I say it. she told them. And they did. The household that had ordered her eyes to the ground her whole life now lifted its own to her. She named it plainly, for the court and for the record. The years of grown work laid on the back of a child. The medicine kept from a sick boy and handed out by the spoon as a leash. The gift they had buried under chores and called nothing at all. She stated each as fact, not as a wound to bleed in front of them. Results, not horror. And the flatness of her voice carried further than any scream could have. Margaret tried once more to break in, to fold a new plea into the gap, and Eleanor simply let the silence answer her until the stepmother faltered and went quiet. Then she gave her judgment. I will cleanse your land. Her voice did not rise. The people on it never raised a hand to me. The farmers, the servants, the tenants. They did me no wrong, and they will not die for what you did. Their fields will come back. Their wells will run clean. The family's faces lifted at that, hope leaping up too fast. So she let the verdict turn. But you will have no place at my side, and no claim on me. You buried what I am, and called it a servant. You will keep nothing of me now, not my name, not my gift, not 1 hour of my life. The land is spared. You are not restored. You will live in the ruin you made, with nothing of mine in it. The words went out into the stone hall and did not echo. They simply landed, one weight at a time, and the family had nothing left to set against them. No command, no threat, no debt they could call in. For the first time, every lever they had ever held over her lay broken on the floor between them, and they could only kneel there and feel the absence of it. And there, somewhere in the middle of that level voice, the thing they had spent years refusing to see finally arrived in them. We had a healer under our own roof. We set her scrubbing the floors and told her it was her place, and watched her hands go raw. We measured out a dying boy's medicine to keep her on a string, and we threw the one gift that could have saved this entire house out the door with the wash water. We had everything. We held it in our 2 hands and called it nothing, and we burned it, and now it sits above us in plain clothes and owes us not one thing. Then the borrowed moment passed, and it was only Eleanor again, standing over them, finishing it. I do not need you broken, she said, and for the first time, something almost gentle moved under the steel. I never did. I only needed to be free of you. I am. She let that settle into the stone of the hall. Then she said the last of it, and this part she spoke as much to the court and to her mother as to the 3 on the floor. My mother hid this gift to keep me safe from people like you. She was right to. I will carry it anyway, in the open, in the light, on my own terms, not hidden, not yours. From the dais, the crown affirmed the judgment, and with that it became binding law over the fate of House Vance. No royal had needed to render justice for the maid the realm had all walked past. She had rendered it herself, in her own voice, while they witnessed. The hall, which had filed in to watch a beggar's audience, held its silence a long moment, and then filled with something closer to awe, and under the awe, an unease nobody quite said aloud, whether mercy that restores nothing is mercy at all, or a colder thing wearing its face. Eleanor turned from the family without waiting to hear them answer it, and walked back up the hall, and did not look at them again. The storm passed, and the house exhaled. Some days later, in the warm rooms of House Ellsworth, the running footsteps in the corridor were Noah's. He came through the door breathless and bright-eyed, and he was not the boy who had once been too weak to cross a room. Dr. Hugh had cleared him that very morning for light exercise, the first time in his short life anyone had told him his body was allowed to do such a thing. The sickness the family had once turned into a weapon had been quieted by something simple they had never once given him. Real care, given steadily, with no price hung on it. Big sister, he said, skidding to a stop in front of her. The doctor says I can run now. I can actually run. He said it in full voice, without a flicker of fear. Once that word had been a thing he could only whisper, frightened, in a candlelit sick room where being heard might cost them both. Eleanor heard the difference in it, and something in her chest came loose that had been knotted for years. Then run, she told him, and crouched down to his level. Run as far as you want. No one's going to stop you here. Dr. Hugh came in behind the boy at an unhurried pace, his small case under one arm. Light exercise only, he warned, though the corner of his mouth had gone soft despite himself. Your body is forgiving you. Don't rush it. Noah was already full of plans. He wanted to learn to fix people the way the doctor had fixed him, he told them, the words tumbling. He wanted to be that kind of healer. Dr. Hugh raised an eyebrow, but he did not say no. Vivian had come to the doorway to watch, and she folded the boy under her arm as he tried to bolt past. This house is yours now, she told the 2 of them, plainly, the way she said everything. Both of you, no conditions. Eleanor stood in the gold light and let herself believe it. For most of her life, a good thing had carried a catch somewhere behind it. waiting. She kept waiting for this one to show its catch, and it never did. Noah broke loose and ran off down the corridor to find somewhere to practice, his footsteps quick and sure, and she watched him go and understood, finally and all at once, what she had been fighting for the whole long year. It had never been their ruin. It had been this, the boy whose medicine had been a leash, simply allowed to be a boy. In the afternoon, they walked the Ellsworth grounds, Eleanor, Noah darting ahead along the hedges, Catherine and Adrian, who had been circling some unsaid thing for weeks. Catherine, with no patience left for the circling, gave him a small shove with her elbow. If you're going to say it now. Adrian had never once given Eleanor an order in all the time she had known him. He did not start now. He laid her choices out in front of her instead, plain and without any weight pressed onto them. She could keep her own standing, beholden to no one. She could live wholly as a daughter of House Ellsworth, safe under their name. Or she could choose to stand at his side. Whichever she picked was hers to pick. "I'd have you choose," he said, "not be told." It landed strangely in her, and she had to stand a moment with how strange it was. Her whole life, choices had been made for her. She had been sold, exiled, commanded, measured, handed from one fate to the next without a word asked of her. And here was the first man who set the decision in her hands instead of taking it out of them. She answered in her own words, "I want to stand beside you as someone of use, someone worth standing there. If you'll have me, I want to be needed." She held his gaze without dropping it. "This time, the choice is mine. I've never had that before." Adrian, who was clumsy with feeling and well aware of it, managed the rest of it short and true. "I need you," he said. "That's all I came to say." Ahead on the path, Noah turned around with the perfect terrible timing of a little brother. "So," he asked into the quiet, "is big sister going to be your bride?" Both of them colored at once, and the grave moment cracked clean open into something warm. Catherine looked thoroughly pleased with herself, like a woman whose long plan had just paid out. "Good," she declared. "Then we can begin the preparations." The vow was a small thing, said quietly between two hedges with a child laughing at it. The thing underneath the vow was the whole of what Eleanor had won, that for once, any answer she gave belonged to her and to no one else to give. The wedding, when it came, was only a bright moment, and the story did not stop long to dwell on it. Bells rang out over Ashford, up the hill and down through every ward. Banners hung from the high windows, and the realm that had once walked past a servant girl without ever seeing her face turned out in full to celebrate the daughter it had overlooked. Eleanor stood beside Adrian in the open light, not rescued, not raised up by him, but chosen and choosing back. It was a good day. It was not the point, and it had never been the point, and the bells knew to keep it brief. Afterward, the life settled into a shape that Eleanor had chosen for herself. She kept her old habit of quietly tending the rooms of the people she loved, moving through the house in the early quiet, setting things right, a cloth still finding its way into her hand. Once she had done exactly this on her knees and under threat, a sound nobody was meant to notice. Now she did it because she wanted to, in a home that was hers, and no one in it would ever again mistake the act for her place. Far off, House Vance lived on exactly as her verdict had left them. The land was cleansed and its innocent people were safe and working their fields again. The family itself stayed ruined and unrestored, frozen out by every house in the realm, gnawing at one another in the wreckage they had built with their own hands. No one would lift them, and their own bitterness would not let them stop their decay. Eleanor did not think of them often. They had what they deserved, which was nothing of her. Noah was thriving. He had set himself to study under Dr. Hugh in earnest, certain now of what he wanted to be. "I'm going to be the kind of doctor," he told her one evening, with the whole of his small, fierce heart in it, "who never lets anyone be held hostage for medicine again." The frightened, whispering boy of a year ago was simply gone. And then, in the quiet, the story turned one last time toward the dark. It had left open behind it. There was so much Eleanor still did not know. How her mother had truly died. Sudden, unexplained, never accounted for. And whether Elise, too, had been buried for the very gift she spent her whole life hiding away. Where the rot had really come from. Cleansing it from the capital had been a battle, not an ending. And something behind it was still out there, unseen and unsourced. And how far the light she carried could actually reach. She sensed now, with the whole kingdom behind her, that she had only begun to learn the shape of what she held. She stood at the open window with the lamp low behind her and looked out toward all of it at once. The unanswered death, the unsourced corruption, the untested ceiling of her own power. "There's still so much I don't know," she said into the dark. "About her, about the rot, about this light I carry." She let out a slow breath. "For once, that doesn't frighten me." The girl who had once been a sound nobody noticed stood in a home that was hers, with her brother safe and running somewhere below her, and the whole open dark ahead, and she was not afraid of any of it. And somewhere out past the window, beyond the last of the bells, the rest of the story waited.